My parents threw me out onto the street over a lie, choosing to protect their golden child rather than listen to a single word I said. So, when my brother tried to frame me a second time to get me out of the picture permanently, I didn't just prove my innocence, I broadcasted his crimes to everyone he ever wanted to impress, leaving his perfect reputation in ashes. I was 19 the first time I realized just how truly disposable I was to my own parents. Not in a dramatic, angst-filled, slamming doors kind of way. I mean genuinely disposable, like a cracked plate they didn't even bother trying to glue back together before tossing it into the garbage. My name is Liam. If you asked anyone in my family back then, they would probably tell you I was the quiet one. The dependable, invisible backbone of the house. I was the kid who kept his grades up, worked part-time at the local Star Mart grocery store, and still managed to cook dinner 3 nights a week because both my mom and dad worked late at their corporate jobs. I honestly didn't mind it. I figured if I just stayed out of trouble, kept my head down, and did the right thing, it would all pay off. I knew I wasn't the smartest, the most athletic, or even the favorite, but I was steady, I was loyal. And in my naive teenage mind, that had to mean something. My younger brother, Connor, was the exact opposite. He was 15, but he carried himself like he owned the world. He had the effortless charm, the perfect hair, and this uncanny ability to twist any story until it sounded like poetry. Everyone adored Connor. Teachers, coaches, our grandparents, even the neighbor who once caught him throwing rocks at her greenhouse. She just laughed it off and said, "Boys have so much energy." My parents ate it up like gospel. I don't think they were intentionally malicious at first. It was just easier to love Connor. He made them laugh. I made them grocery lists. If Connor got detention for skipping class, it was because he was not being challenged enough academically. When I pulled a B in AP chemistry, I got a stern lecture about my lack of focus and drive. But I didn't resent him. Not really. We shared a roof, and he was my brother. I just figured the real world would eventually catch up with him, and maybe then, we'd finally be on even ground. The house we grew up in wasn't abusive, but it wasn't warm either. It was completely transactional and sterile. Rules were posted on the fridge in laminated sleeves. Chores were rotated on a strict spreadsheet. Affection was functional, a brief pat on the shoulder if you did well, a nod if you stayed out of the way. I wasn't the kind of kid who needed constant praise. I just wanted a little fairness and a baseline of trust. So when the whole damn thing unraveled, I wasn't even angry at first. I was just profoundly confused, stunned, as if I had walked onto the wrong movie set and didn't know my lines. It was a chilly Friday in early spring. I had just walked home from a brutal 8-hour shift at Star Mart. I was still wearing my scratchy blue uniform, smelling like industrial floor cleaner and stale bread. The second I unlocked the front door and stepped into the hallway, my mom came charging at me like she had been waiting to ambush me. "Where is it?" she snapped, her voice echoing off the hardwood floor. I blinked, exhausted. "Where's what?" "Don't play dumb with me, Liam. The cash. Connor said you took it from his room." At first, I genuinely thought it was a prank. Connor was always messing around. "Mom, I just got off a double shift. I haven't even been home since 6 this morning. Don't lie to me." Her voice cracked, but not with doubt. It was pure, unadulterated anger. She looked offended that I was even trying to defend myself. "He said he had $450 saved up from his birthday and Christmas. It's gone, and your work backpack was sitting right inside his door this afternoon." I stared at her, utterly bewildered. Why would I even go into his room? I have my own money. Maybe because you've been complaining about your car needing a new alternator? You've been walking to work all week, Liam. It was true. My beat-up Honda had died in the driveway a week ago, and I was stressed about the repair costs. But the leap in logic that I would sneak into my own brother's room like a common thief, steal his birthday money, and leave my bag as evidence was insane. "I didn't take a single dime from him," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, serious register. That was the moment something in her eyes hardened. It was a terrifying shift. It was the look of a woman who had already acted as judge, jury, and executioner. I was no longer her son, I was a liability. Dad walked in a few minutes later, still wearing his tailored work suit, loosening his tie. Mom briefed him in frantic whispers. And just like that, the trial was over before it began. There was no questioning Connor. There was no searching the house for misplaced cash. There wasn't even a moment of hesitation. "You need to leave," Dad said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. I looked at him, waiting for the punchline. Just for a few hours while we calmed down. But he just stared at me blankly. "Are you serious?" I choked out, my chest tightening. "You're kicking me out over a lie? Dad, I didn't do anything." He didn't flinch. "You've been distant lately. Moody. This kind of behavior doesn't just come out of nowhere. Maybe spending the night on your own will help you reevaluate your choices in this house." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. My pride wouldn't let me. I just turned around in a daze, grabbed my backpack, my phone charger, and walked out the door. It wasn't until I was 3 blocks away, shivering in the spring wind, that I realized I had absolutely nowhere to go. I didn't have close friends who lived nearby. I didn't have family in town besides my grandparents, and I was too ashamed to call them. I had a dead car in the driveway and exactly $12 in my wallet. I walked for hours until my feet blistered. Eventually, I ended up at the downtown transit center. I slumped against a freezing metal bench, pulled my hoodie tight over my head, and listened to my stomach growl. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mom's furious face. I heard my dad's cold dismissal. And worst of all, I saw Connor standing at the top of the stairs, watching the whole thing happen with a smug, satisfied little smirk on his face. I survived out there for 2 days. 2 full days of silence from my family. No texts, no missed calls. Not a single, "Are you alive?" When I finally swallowed my pride and walked back through the front door on Sunday evening, pale, stiff, and hollowed out, they barely looked up from the television. Dad just nodded toward the kitchen. "There's leftover chicken in the fridge. I hope you've learned your lesson." That should have been the breaking point. But the real devastating blow came 3 weeks later, at my grandmother's 75th birthday barbecue. Everyone was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. The backyard was packed. I was standing near the patio, holding a paper plate of potato salad, trying to remain invisible. That's when Connor, surrounded by our cousins, decided to tell the story of my eviction. He didn't tell it with guilt or shame. He told it like it was a hilarious stand-up comedy routine. You should have seen Liam's face when Mom told him to pack his bags. Connor laughed, taking a sip of his soda. All over some fake prop money I printed out for a theater project. I just stuffed it in his bag as a joke. I didn't think they'd actually throw him out into the street. I froze. The blood drained from my face so fast the world tilted. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He was laughing. He had let me sleep on a metal bench surrounded by junkies, and he thought it was a funny anecdote. But then, I saw Granddad Arthur. Granddad was a stoic, no-nonsense retired engineer. He was standing just behind Connor's circle of friends, holding a small, black rectangular box. A security DVR. Granddad didn't yell. He just stepped forward, slammed the DVR onto the patio table with a heavy Times thud, and looked at Connor. "I think it's time we watch a little home movie." The entire backyard went dead silent. My uncle stopped mid-bite of his burger. My mom, who had been bragging about Connor's debate team medals, turned around, her polite smile faltering. "Dad, what are you doing?" Granddad didn't look at her. "I was checking the wiring on the house a few months back. Installed a few discreet cameras to watch the driveway after the neighbor's car got keyed. I happened to point one down the upstairs hallway. Caught some interesting footage." Connor's face went from smug, to confused, to absolute sheer panic in the span of 3 seconds. "Come on, Granddad," Connor stammered, his voice cracking. "It was just a prank. We already moved past it. Liam's fine, right?" He looked at me, begging me with his eyes to play along and save him. I just stared at him, my hands trembling. I was back on that freezing bus station bench. Granddad plugged a portable monitor into the DVR and pressed play. The screen flickered to life in grainy black and white. It showed the upstairs hallway. It showed my backpack sitting by the stairs where I had left it. Then, the door to Connor's room opened. Connor walked out, looked left, looked right, unzipped my bag, and dropped a stack of papers inside. He looked directly toward the camera's hidden location, flashed a massive grin, and walked away. The silence in the backyard was suffocating. You could literally feel the collective mental image of Connor shattering into a million pieces. That's not what it looks like." Connor whispered. "It is exactly what it looks like," Granddad growled. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. But looking at my parents, I just felt empty. My mom turned pale. My dad's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would crack. But neither of them looked at me. Neither of them apologized. The barbecue ended shortly after that. People made awkward excuses and practically sprinted to their cars. Granddad packed up his equipment, gave me a long, sad look, and drove off. UP Date 1. If you think the video changed everything, you're wrong. Things didn't go back to normal, but they didn't exactly improve either. There were stiff, forced apologies from my parents. "We just didn't have the full picture, Liam," Mom said one night, refusing to make eye contact. "You should have communicated better." "Work has been stressful," Dad mumbled. "We overreacted. Let's just put it behind us as a family." Connor didn't get punished. Not really. He got grounded for 2 weeks, which meant no video games and no hanging out at the mall, but there were no real consequences. He didn't even have to apologize to me. In fact, he started acting like Times was the victim. He complained loudly that Granddad had violated his human rights by filming him without consent. And my parents? They just wanted the whole ugly mess swept under the rug. They wanted their perfect family illusion back. But the damage was done. The knife had gone in, and they had simply snapped off the handle and left the blade in my back. I changed. I stopped coming home after work. I would spend hours sitting in the public library, reading random books, or just staring at the wall until closing time. I stopped eating dinner with them. I dropped weight. I stopped talking. I became a ghost in my own home. But Connor wasn't satisfied. He hated that the dynamic had shifted. He hated that people in the family were whispering about him. So, he went on the offensive. Not. I found out from a former friend that Connor had started spreading rumors about me at school and in our neighborhood. He told everyone that I was suffering from severe mental health issues. He claimed I was paranoid, that I made up the story about being homeless to guilt trip our parents, and that the video was actually a staged psychology project that Granddad took out of context. My reputation tanked. Teachers started treating me like I was fragile. Former friends avoided me in the halls. I was so depressed I started showing up late to work at Starmart, making stupid mistakes, until my manager finally had to let me go. "You're just not the same kid anymore, Liam," he told me sadly. I hit absolute rock bottom. I had no job, no money, no friends, and a family that wished I would just disappear. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Granddad Arthur. "Need an extra pair of hands at the lake house this weekend. You free?" The lake house was a rundown, dilapidated cabin about an hour outside of town near the Silver Pines. We used to go there when I was a little kid, but it had been abandoned for years. I had nothing else to lose, so I borrowed Granddad's old truck and drove up. That weekend saved my life. Granddad didn't coddle me. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He just handed me a hammer, a box of roofing nails, and pointed at the rotting porch. "Show me, you still know how to work," he said. We spent 3 days sweating, bleeding, and ripping up rotted wood. At night, we sat by a roaring fire, drinking black coffee. He never brought up Connor. But on Sunday, right before we left, he handed me a thick manila envelope. "It's not much," Granddad said gruffly. "But it's enough to get the engine turning again. Use this place. Fix it up. Build something for yourself that they can't touch." Inside was $750 in cash, a list of local trade apprenticeships, and a shiny new brass key to the cabin. I broke down and cried for the first time in months. I used that money to get my car fixed. I applied for a job at a local lumber yard and got hired by a tough-as-nails woman named Sarah who didn't care about my family drama, just that I could lift heavy bags of concrete. I started spending every weekend at the lake house, repairing the roof, painting the walls, replacing the plumbing. I enrolled in evening classes for a masonry and construction certification at the community college. I started building a life completely separate from the toxic wasteland of my childhood home. Back at the house, I played the part of the broken, defeated older brother perfectly. I kept my head down, barely spoke, and left my bedroom door unlocked. Connor thought he had won. He thought I was utterly crushed. His arrogance grew by the day. Then, I overheard the conversation. That sealed his fate. I was in the kitchen late one night, getting a glass of water, when I heard Connor whispering frantically on his phone in the living room. The walls were thin. "Yeah, but if I tell the principal he threatened me physically, they'll have to take it seriously," Connor hissed. "He's already got the reputation of being unhinged. I just need someone to corroborate it." "No, I'm not lying, I'm just setting the stage. I don't care if they expel him or kick him out again. Honestly, he's just dragging my vibe down. He needs to go." I stood in the dark kitchen, the glass of water trembling in my hand. A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. Connor didn't just want to be the favorite. He wanted to eradicate me. He wanted to destroy my life just because my existence inconvenienced his ego. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt surgical. I realized that revenge doesn't start with screaming or throwing punches. It starts with absolute silence. You just have to give a monster enough rope to hang himself. The next day, I drove to an electronics store and bought 2 high-end, motion-activated hidden cameras with Wi-Fi upload capabilities. I spent hours at the lake house configuring them to a secure, encrypted cloud server. I installed one inside the air vent in my bedroom, angled perfectly down at my desk and bed. I hid the second one inside a hollowed-out digital clock on my nightstand, capturing the doorway. I also reached out to Aunt Clara. She was my mom's sister, a sharp-tongued, no-bullshit woman who had recently moved back to town after a messy divorce. She had always seen right through Connor's golden boy act. We met for coffee. I told her everything. "You look like you're planning a murder," she said, stirring her espresso. "Worse," I replied. "I'm letting him commit career suicide. I just need someone on the inside to hold the evidence in case he tries to destroy my devices." She grinned, a wicked, terrifying smile. "Give me the flash drives. I'll keep them in my fireproof safe." For the next 3 weeks, I laid the bait. I left my laptop open. I left my phone charging on my bed while I took overly long showers. I acted extra spacey and distracted around the house. Connor couldn't resist. The footage I captured was a goldmine of sociopathic behavior. The cameras caught him sneaking into my room on 4 separate occasions. They caught him physically going through my drawers. They caught him unlocking my phone. He had watched me type my passcode, taking pictures of my private journal entries, and rearranging my apps to make me think I was losing my mind. But the crown jewel was a video with crystal clear audio where he stood in my room, called his friend on speakerphone, and explicitly detailed how he was going to plant a stolen school laptop in my trunk to get me arrested for theft. It's foolproof, Connor laughed on the recording. Liam's already a known screw-up. The cops won't even question it. I downloaded every single clip. I backed them up in 3 different cloud servers. I gave a master flash drive to Aunt Clara. I was ready. I just needed the perfect stage. Update 2. The perfect stage presented itself 2 weeks later, the autumn leadership banquet at Connor's high school. Connor was the president of the debate club and the shining star of the student council. He had been selected to give the keynote speech in front of the entire faculty, the school board, the scholarship committee, and hundreds of parents. My mom and dad were practically vibrating with pride. Dad bought a new suit. Mom spent 3 hours doing her hair. They offered me a ticket, assuming I would just sit in the back and quietly bask in my brother's superiority. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I told them, smiling for the first time in months. The banquet was held in the massive school auditorium. The room was packed. I sat in the very back row, the darkness hiding my face. I had my laptop open on my knees, tethered to my phone's hotspot. I had spent the previous night compiling a master email list. It included the school principal, the head of the scholarship committee, every single teacher Connor had ever bragged about manipulating, the student council faculty advisors, and the local police department's non-emergency tip line. At 7:30 p.m., the principal introduced Connor. The crowd erupted into applause. Connor walked up to the podium, adjusted his tie, and flashed that $1 million, sociopathic smile. Integrity, Connor began, his voice echoing through the speakers. It is the foundation of leadership. It is what we do when no one is watching that defines who we truly are. It was almost too poetic. As he spoke his second sentence, I pressed send. The email went out to 85 different inboxes simultaneously. The subject line read, "The real Connor, evidence of planned theft, harassment, and fraud." Inside was a beautifully formatted timeline of events, summarizing his actions, followed by direct links to the high-definition video files on the cloud server. I didn't stick around to watch the immediate explosion. I closed my laptop, slipped out the back doors of the auditorium, walked to my car, and drove directly to the lake house. I turned my phone off, poured myself a glass of water, and sat on the porch, listening to the crickets. The fallout was apocalyptic. I turned my phone on the next morning to 47 missed calls, 120 text messages, and a voicemail inbox that was completely full. From what Aunt Clara told me later, the chaos started about 5 minutes after I sent the email. My mom, sitting in the front row, felt her phone buzz. She opened the email. Several teachers on the stage also checked their phones. The principal's tablet lit up. By the time Connor finished his grand speech about moral fortitude, the entire faculty row was staring at him with absolute horror and disgust. Someone Aunt Clara suspects it was the debate coach actually clicked the video link and accidentally let the audio play through their phone speakers for a few seconds. The sound of Connor plotting to frame me for a felony echoed faintly in the front rows. Connor was pulled into the principal's office before he even made it to the punch bowl. The dominoes fell with terrifying speed. Within 48 hours, Connor was stripped of his student council presidency. He was kicked off the debate team. The scholarship committee formally withdrew his candidacy, citing severe moral turpitude. Because the video explicitly detailed his plan to steal school property, the laptop to frame me, the school resource officer got involved. Connor was slapped with a massive suspension, pending a full expulsion hearing. His friends abandoned him instantly. The rumor mill he had weaponized against me turned its sights on him. He became a total pariah overnight. But the absolute climax of this entire saga happened on Sunday. Granddad Arthur had received the videos from Aunt Clara. He called a mandatory family meeting at my parents' house. I drove down from the lake house. When I walked into the kitchen, the atmosphere was suffocating. Connor was sitting at the table, his face red, eyes swollen from crying. He looked small. He looked terrified. My parents looked like they had aged 10 years in 3 days. Aunt Clara was leaning against the counter, sipping a cup of tea, looking incredibly satisfied. Granddad Arthur stood at the head of the table. He didn't yell, he didn't have to. His quiet rage was infinitely more terrifying. He plugged a USB drive into the living room television and hit play. He forced my parents to watch every single second of the footage. He forced them to listen to their golden child maliciously plot to destroy his own brother's life and send him to jail. When the screen went black, Granddad turned to my parents. "You created this." Granddad pointed a trembling finger at my dad. "You let this boy believe he was untouchable. You threw your eldest son out onto the street like garbage to protect a liar. You enabled a monster." "Dad, please," my mom sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "We didn't know, we had no idea he was capable of this." "You didn't want to know," Granddad roared, finally losing his temper. The walls seemed to shake. You chose the easy path. Ah. Well, the easy path just led you off a cliff. Granddad then looked at Connor, who was shrinking into his chair. You are a disgrace to this family's name. Until you learn what it means to be a decent human being, you do not speak to me. You do not visit my home. You are nothing to me. Granddad turned back to my parents. And as for you two, you will pay for Liam's trade school in full. You will transfer the title of the lake house into Liam's name immediately. If you refuse, or if you ever try to defend this boy's actions again, I will rewrite my will tomorrow and you won't see a single red cent of my estate. Do I make myself clear? My dad, completely broken, just nodded. I stood up. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt immensely tired, but completely free. Dad looked at me, tears in his eyes. Liam, son, I am so sorry. How do we fix this? What happens now? I slung my backpack over my shoulder and looked him dead in the eye. You don't fix it. The plate is shattered, Dad. You can't glue it back together. I'm going to go live my life. You stay here and live yours. And then, I walked out the front door. It's been a year and a half since that day. The lake house is officially in my name, and I've fully renovated it. I graduated from my masonry program and now run my own small contracting business with Sarah's help. I make good money, I sleep peacefully, and I have a life built entirely by my own two hands. Connor was expelled. He had to transfer to a continuation school, 2 towns over. He has no friends, no extracurriculars, and his college prospects are practically zero. He spends his weekends doing court-mandated community service. My parents live in a quiet, miserable house, constantly policing their golden boy who turned out to be a sociopath. They try to reach out sometimes, birthdays, holidays. They send cards with checks and desperate apologies. I return the checks and throw the cards in the fire pit at the lake house. Some bridges don't need to be burned. If you just step back and wait long enough, they collapse under the weight of their own rot. My brother walked into a police station and falsely accused me of stealing from our parents to cover his own tracks. So I smiled at family dinners for weeks while quietly building a bulletproof forensic case that would send him to jail. I live in Austin, Texas. I've been entirely independent since the day I turned 18. I say entirely because there was a brief stretch during my sophomore year of college where I lived off bulk rice and black beans, and maybe once a month I'd accept a care package of toiletries from my mom. But I paid my own tuition, worked 30 hours a week at a local tax preparation office, and walked across the graduation stage without asking my parents for a single dime beyond the occasional box of granola bars. My brother, Julian, is 3 years younger than me, and we couldn't be more different if we were born on different planets. Julian is the kind of guy who walks into a crowded room and immediately becomes the center of gravity. He always has been. He's conventionally handsome, effortlessly funny, incredibly quick on his feet, and sells high-end medical devices for a living. He makes solid money doing it. If you met him at a neighborhood barbecue, you'd probably think he was the greatest guy in the world. Most people do. Growing up, Julian was the undisputed favorite. I don't say that with any lingering bitterness. Okay, maybe a microscopic amount, but it's just an objective fact. My mom, Martha, is a retired middle school teacher. She is sweet as anything, but she has a blind spot the size of a football stadium when it comes to Julian. He was her baby. He was the one who always needed more help with homework, more attention at sports games, more emotional support through every minor inconvenience. I was the quiet, self-sufficient one who handled things on my own. Because I didn't demand attention, everyone just assumed I was perfectly fine. My dad, Arthur, is a retired city transit supervisor. He is a genuinely good man. He's 66, has 2 bad knees, and manages early onset diabetes. I know he loves us both, but he spent his entire 40-year marriage deferring to my mom on anything regarding the family dynamic. If Martha looks up and says the sky is neon pink, Arthur is already reaching for his wallet to buy pink paint. Here's the fundamental truth about my family: we are not dramatic. We are not the kind of people who throw dinner plates against the wall or have screaming matches on the front lawn. We are the kind of people who let resentments fester quietly in the dark until the rot is so deep nobody can fix it. Passive-aggressive texts, long, heavy silences, and saying I'm fine when absolutely nothing is fine. That is our family brand. For years, I've kept a very comfortable, calculated distance. I visit for major holidays. I call my mom every other Sunday. I send thoughtful birthday cards with gift certificates. I'm not officially estranged, I'm just separate. I built my own life from scratch, and I actually like it. I own a nice townhouse with a small backyard. I have a demanding but rewarding career. I have a tight-knit circle of close friends. It's not a glamorous life, but it is entirely mine. Julian, on the other hand, has been circling the financial drain for years, and nobody in the family breathes a word about it. He married his wife, Chloe, 4 years ago. She is 30, Works part-time doing social media management for a local boutique that barely has any foot traffic, and has champagne expectations on a sparkling water budget. They gutted and renovated their kitchen last year. Custom quartz countertops, a smart fridge, the works. Julian drives a leased Tesla Model Y. They took a 10-day trip to the Maldives for their 3rd anniversary. Everything looks impeccably perfect from the outside. But here is the thing, I know exactly what medical device reps make in this region. It is very good money, but it is absolutely not Tesla plus Maldives plus custom quartz money. Not without significant outside help. But I minded my own business, because that is what I do, that is what our family does. We don't ask questions that might ruin the illusion. I should tell you about one specific incident before I get into the main event. Last Thanksgiving, I was sitting in my parents' living room, and Julian walked in wearing a brand new watch. I am not a watch aficionado, but I know enough to recognize a Rolex Submariner when it's flashing in the light. My mom immediately complimented it, cooing over how handsome it looked. Chloe chimed in, saying something about how Julian had hit his quarterly targets and deserved a little treat. Nobody asked how he paid for a $15,000 watch. I quietly ate my turkey, drank my beer, and kept my mouth firmly shut. That is the ecosystem. A family where one person's reckless spending is never questioned, and another person's silence is immediately mistaken for apathy. The absolute nightmare started about 4 months ago when my dad called me on a random Tuesday night. This was highly unusual. Dad doesn't make phone calls. Dad answers the phone and hands it to Mom. That is the established system. "Hey, bud," he said, and his voice had this careful, walking on eggshells quality that instantly made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Got a quick question for you. Kind of a financial thing." "Sure, Dad, what's up?" "When you were over here for Easter." He paused, taking a heavy breath. "Did you, happen to use my computer? The desktop in the den?" "Yeah, I checked my work email on it for about 10 minutes before dinner." "Why?" Another long, agonizing pause. "Your mother noticed some money moved out of one of our savings accounts, and she's trying to figure out the timeline." I frowned. "How much money?" $7,500. I sat perfectly still at my kitchen island for a full 5 seconds. "Dad, are you asking me if I stole $7,500 from your bank account?" No, he said entirely too quickly, his voice pitching up. "We're just trying to figure out what happened." Julian thought maybe. "Well, Julian thought maybe you made a mistake." Julian thought what? He said you'd asked him about our account a few weeks ago, about how the online banking portal worked. He was just trying to help us trace the missing funds. I felt a cold drop of adrenaline hit my stomach. I told my dad, speaking as clearly and calmly as humanly possible, that I had never asked Julian a single question about their banking. I had not accessed any financial accounts, and I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He said okay. He said he believed me. He said it was probably just a weird bank error and they would get it sorted out with the branch manager. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark kitchen for 20 minutes, replaying the conversation on a loop. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the specific framing. Julian thought maybe. Julian was trying to help trace it. Julian had already inserted himself as the hero in a narrative before I even knew a narrative existed. I almost called Julian right then to scream at him. My thumb hovered over his contact name, but a very quiet, professional instinct told me to wait. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at my desk on a Wednesday morning, deeply engrossed in reviewing a corporate client's quarterly tax filings, when my cell phone rang. Unknown number, local Austin area code. "Is this Ethan Hayes speaking?" "Speaking. Mr. Hayes, this is Detective Vance with the Austin Police Department, Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling regarding a theft report that's been filed, and your name has come up as a primary subject of interest. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Would you be available to come down to the precinct this week?" I felt the floor literally tilt beneath my office chair. The air left my lungs. A theft report? My name? I managed to choke out. "Can you tell me who filed this report?" "I can tell you it involves a formal complaint from a family member regarding unauthorized access to a joint financial account. I'd rather discuss the specific details in person, Mr. Hayes." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and told him I would be there on Friday. I hung up, stood up, walked over to my office door, closed it, locked it, sat back down, and stared blankly at the wall for what felt like an hour. My senior mentor and coworker, Evelyn, knocked on the glass partition about 15 minutes later. Evelyn is in her late 40s, a senior partner at the firm, and possesses the kind of razor-sharp intellect that misses absolutely nothing. She opened the door halfway, took one look at my pale face, and said, "You look like someone just read you your Miranda rights." "Funny you should say that," I muttered. She stepped inside, closed the blinds, and sat across from me. I gave her the short, unfiltered version of what had just happened. She listened with total focus, not interrupting once. You need to go into that precinct with a concrete plan, she said, her tone dead serious. Not just a defensive explanation, a plan. And you absolutely need a defense lawyer, before you say a single word. I know, I breathed out. She nodded sharply, stood up, and left the room. I sat there thinking about how my own brother, the kid I taught how to ride a bike, the kid I drove to his senior prom because he'd drunkenly wrecked his car the week before and our parents didn't have the money to fix it. It had just deliberately put me in a position where I needed a criminal defense attorney to avoid prison time. Then, I pulled out my personal encrypted laptop and started doing exactly what I do for a living. I am a forensic accountant. I track missing money for a living. I unweave complex webs of corporate fraud. I just didn't know yet how incredibly deep and dark this particular hole went. I went to the police precinct on Friday morning. I wore a tailored button-down shirt and dress slacks because I am the kind of person who dresses up when a detective wants to interrogate me about a felony I didn't commit. Detective Vance turned out to be a stocky, tired-looking guy in his 50s with a graying mustache and a calm, unhurried demeanor that was terrifying in its own way. He shook my hand, offered me a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee, and led me into an interview room that smelled like old sweat and floor wax. So, here's what I've got, Ethan, Vance said, flipping open a thick manila folder. Your parents, Arthur and Martha Hayes, reported that exactly $7,500 was transferred from a joint savings account without their authorization. The formal police report was filed by your brother, Julian Hayes, acting on their behalf. On their behalf, I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, he came in personally. Sat right in that plastic chair you're sitting in. He stated on the record that you had access to the household computer during a recent Easter family visit, that you had previously asked him probing questions about the banking setup and passwords, and that the unauthorized transfers began immediately after you left. None of that is true. Vance looked at me steadily, his pen hovering over his notepad. I'm giving you the opportunity to tell me your side of the story right now. So, I did. I told him I used my dad's computer to check my work email for exactly 10 minutes on Easter Sunday. I told him I had never asked Julian, or anyone else, a single question about their banking logistics. I told him I had zero idea what specific account was involved, what bank held the funds, or how the transfers were executed. And then, I leaned forward and told him exactly what I do for a living. That got a reaction. Just a slight raise of his bushy eyebrows, but a reaction nonetheless. Forensic accounting, Vance said slowly. Yes, sir. So I can tell you right now, as a professional in this exact field, if you pull the IP logs, the MAC addresses, and the device identifiers from those fraudulent transactions, they will not trace back to any device I own, any network I have ever used, or any location I have ever been. That's a bold claim, but helpful, Vance said, writing something down. We're still in the very early stages of subpoenaing the bank records. I'll be in touch. I walked out of that precinct and sat in my hot car for 20 minutes. My hands weren't shaking, but my jaw was clenched so hard my teeth ached. The thing that kept cycling through my mind wasn't the accusation itself. It was the undeniable fact that Julian had physically walked into a police station, sworn an oath, and formally lied to a detective to ruin my life. That is not a simple family misunderstanding. That is a calculated, malicious, sociopathic act. I called my mom that night. Ethan, honey, I know this is so upsetting. She started immediately, her voice trembling. Mom, did you and Dad file a police report against me? A long, suffocating pause. Julian handled it. He was just so worried about our retirement. He said it was just to create a paper trail in case the bank needed one to refund the money. A paper trail that explicitly says your son stole from you. Nobody is saying you actually stole anything, Ethan. Julian just panicked. You know how protective he gets. He told the detective you asked him about our banking login. That never happened, Mom. Well, maybe he just got a little confused. Maybe he misremembered a conversation. Mom. He sat in a police interrogation room and gave a sworn, formal statement to a detective. People do not misremember that. She went completely quiet. Then, she said the one thing that I think she genuinely believed would magically fix everything. Ethan, please, don't ruin the family over one little mistake. He panicked. That's all. Let's just move past it. I didn't argue. There was absolutely nothing left to argue about. She had already constructed her alternate reality. In her version, Julian was a well-meaning, overly protective son who got a tiny bit carried away, and I was the cold, unfeeling brother overreacting to a minor slight. Okay, Mom, I said softly, I hear you. I hung up the phone, walked into my home office, and opened my laptop. Here is where the forensic accountant detail stops being a fun background fact and becomes the weapon I used to destroy my brother. The very first thing I did was hire a lawyer. Evelyn gave me a recommendation. Sarah Jenkins. Mid-40s, former federal prosecutor, absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. During our initial consultation, I laid out every single detail. If this Detective Vance does his job, Sarah said, tapping her expensive pen on her mahogany desk, the bank records will tell the whole story, but we are not going to sit around passively hoping a busy detective does his job perfectly. We are going to force the issue. She immediately drafted and sent a preservation letter to my parents' bank, a strict legal hold demanding they preserve all transaction records, IP logs, and login metadata associated with my parents' accounts for the past 48 months. She also drafted a formal response to the police department categorically denying every single claim Julian made. Meanwhile, I did something I am not entirely proud of, but I would do it again in a heartbeat. I went back through my own digital life. I pulled 3 years' worth of emails, text messages, calendar entries, Google Maps location histories, and credit card receipts. I built a massive, color-coded spreadsheet documenting every single day I had visited my parents over the past 3 years, dates, times, durations, and the purpose of the visit. Then, I cross-referenced those dates with my corporate travel records, flights, hotel Wi-Fi logins, out-of-state client dinners. When Sarah finally got a redacted copy of the police report through the public records process, I read it 4 times. Julian's statement was incredibly detailed, too detailed. He didn't just say I asked about the bank. He fabricated an entire conversation we supposedly had in the kitchen on Easter Sunday, claiming I asked if the bank used two-factor authentication. He provided the exact dates and amounts for the transfers. But here is the detail that stopped my heart. The official police report listed the theft amount for the current investigation as $7,500. But down in the supplemental notes, a section Julian likely didn't realize I would ever see, there was a brief note from the detective. Complainant suspects historical losses totaling approx. $53,000. $53,000. My parents are comfortable, but they are not rich. My dad's city pension and my mom's modest teacher retirement fund are their entire safety net. Losing $53,000 is a catastrophic, life-altering blow to them. And Julian had only formally reported the $7,500. Why? Because he didn't want the police looking too closely at the other $45,500. Because the $7,500 was the only withdrawal sloppy and massive enough that my dad actually noticed it on a mailed paper statement. The rest of the money had been bleeding out in tiny, methodical increments over a much longer period. I sat at my kitchen island at 2 a.m., staring at a monitor that proved my brother had lied to the police to frame me, purely to cover up the fact that he had been systematically robbing our elderly parents blind to fund his Tesla and his Rolex. And the part that felt like a knife twisting in my ribs was knowing that my parents were going to fight me on this. They would fight me because admitting I was innocent meant admitting their golden boy was a monster, and they were not psychologically built for that reality. I saved the spreadsheet, backed it up to 3 separate encrypted cloud drives, and went to sleep. Because the next phase was going to require immense patience, and patience requires rest. The next 6 weeks were the most psychologically agonizing stretch of my entire life. And not because anything explosive happened. The exact opposite, nothing happened. That was the entire point. Sarah, my attorney, gave me strict orders. Be the most boring human being on the planet. Do not confront Julian. Do not have emotional talks with your parents. Do not post vague quotes on Facebook. Do not do a single thing that can be painted as retaliatory, unstable, or guilty. You are building a case file, Ethan. The best case files are assembled by people who look completely unbothered. So, I played the part flawlessly. I went to the office. I hit the gym. I mowed my lawn. I called my mom on Sundays and talked about the Texas heat, Dad's tomato garden, and what I was watching on Netflix. During one of those Sunday calls, Mom was in an incredibly cheerful mood because she had found a vintage lamp at a flea market. We laughed about how Dad hated it. Normal, loving mother-son banter. Then, right before we hung up, she casually sighed and said, Julian and Chloe are thinking about buying a bigger house next year, maybe starting a family. Wouldn't that just be wonderful, Ethan? I stared at my living room wall, imagining Julian bringing a child into a financial house of cards built on money stolen from that child's grandparents. I imagined my mom knitting baby blankets while her retirement fund was being siphoned away. Yeah, Mom. That would be wonderful, I said, my voice completely dead. I could hear the sheer relief in her tone. She genuinely believed the police thing had just gone away, because I wasn't screaming about it. Julian, for his part, had the absolute audacity to text me twice during this waiting period. Once to send a meme about the Dallas Cowboys, and once with a photo of a brisket he was smoking, captioned, "Mastering the pit bro. Just a guy being a guy. Nothing to see here." I didn't reply to either text. He didn't follow up. It told me everything I needed to know about his absolute arrogance. He thought he had won. At work, I poured my soul into my forensic reconstruction. Evelyn helped me off the books. We structured my analysis so it would hold up to the most brutal legal scrutiny. Clean documentation, clear source attribution, zero logical gaps. Here is what I pieced together from the preliminary bank data Sarah forced the bank to hand over to the police, which Vance subsequently shared pieces of with us during discovery. 3 years ago, my mom had quietly added Julian to a joint savings account linked to their primary retirement funds. The excuse was medical emergencies. Dad's diabetes had scared her, and she wanted someone local to have instant access to cash if Dad ended up in the ICU. She didn't add me because I lived an hour away, and Julian lived 10 minutes away. Logistically, it made sense. What didn't make sense was the pattern of withdrawals that began exactly 4 months after Julian got access. The transactions were terrifyingly smart. I'll give him credit for that. Most were under $900. A few were structured as round, innocuous numbers, $400, $650. They looked like routine household transfers or medical copays if you weren't looking with a magnifying glass. But I am a forensic accountant. I don't just look at the numbers, I look at the routing metadata. Some of the transfers were masked as payments to generic-sounding online vendors. But when I traced the routing numbers, they were direct payments to Julian's personal Chase credit card, and payments to Tesla Financial Services. He was literally using Mom and Dad's retirement to pay off his luxury car lease and his Maldives vacation debt. The total over 36 months came to exactly $53,420. My parents never noticed because Mom only checked the balance once a year during tax season, and Dad trusted Mom entirely. The $7,500 withdrawal that finally caught their eye was Julian getting desperate. He had a massive balloon payment due on a private loan, and he got sloppy. When Dad saw the missing $7,500 and panicked, Julian panicked too, and pointed his finger directly at me. By week 7, Sarah called me into her office. The full bank records had finally cleared the police fraud department. Detective Vance has the full report, Sarah said, sliding a massive stack of papers across her desk. Every single flagged transaction traces directly to a device registered to Julian Hayes. The IP addresses correspond perfectly to his home Wi-Fi network, and in several instances, to his iPhone's cellular IP while he was physically at his sales job. Your name, your devices, and your IP addresses do not appear a single time in the access logs. I sat back and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 months. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her eyes gleaming, for 11 of the largest transfer dates, including one for $2,000, you were verifiably out of state on corporate travel. We have the hotel Wi-Fi logs to prove it. So, what happens now? I asked. Now, we compile your forensic analysis, my legal brief, and the bank's raw data into one massive binder. And we wait for the perfect moment to drop the hammer. That perfect moment arrived 3 days later. Julian called me on a Thursday. His voice was warm, casual, and completely unbothered, like a man who had successfully buried a body and paved a driveway over it. Hey man. So, Mom and Dad's 40th anniversary is this Saturday. Chloe and I are putting together a nice dinner at that upscale steakhouse downtown. Nothing huge, just the 6 of us. Mom really wants you there. He paused, playing the role of the benevolent peacemaker. I know things have been a little weird lately with the whole bank confusion thing. Let's just put it all behind us, okay? Fresh start. Family first. Fresh start. Like he hadn't tried to send me to a state penitentiary. Like he hadn't stolen 53 grand from the people who raised us. Sure, Julian, I said, smiling into the empty room. Saturday works perfectly. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I hung up and called Sarah. I need the binder delivered to Detective Vance tomorrow morning. Friday. Sarah laughed. Consider it done. I went to the anniversary dinner on Saturday night. I know some of you reading this are screaming at your screens, wondering why I would sit down and break bread with this psychopath. But I didn't go for Julian. I went because my dad, who never asked to be in the middle of this nightmare, deserved to have a peaceful dinner for his 40th anniversary before his entire world collapsed. The steakhouse was incredibly expensive. Dim lighting, leather booths, crystal glasses. Chloe was already there, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, sipping a martini. She gave me a smug, territorial smile. Julian stood up and pulled me into a tight bro hug, clapping my back. So glad you made it, bro, he said, flashing his perfect teeth. My parents arrived, looking happy and relaxed. Mom hugged me so tightly I could feel the desperate relief radiating off her. She thought we had fixed it. She thought the boys were getting along again. We ordered dry-aged steaks. We drank expensive Cabernet. We laughed about old family vacations. Julian was in absolute peak form. He was charming the waiter, telling hilarious stories about his sales clients, acting like the undisputed king of the table. I sat there, quietly chewing my steak, watching him perform, knowing that less than 24 hours ago, Detective Vance had received a 400-page binder detailing every single felony Julian had committed. At the end of the meal, Julian stood up and raised his glass. To Mom and Dad, he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. 40 years of love, sacrifice, and putting family first. We owe you everything. Here's to family. To family, Mom whispered, dabbing a tear from her eye. I raised my glass, looked Julian dead in the eyes, and took a sip. I paid for my half of the exorbitant bill, hugged my parents in the valet line, shook Julian's hand, and drove home in silence. Monday morning at 9 a.m., Detective Vance called Julian and asked him to come down to the precinct for a routine follow-up. I know exactly what happened in that room because it is all part of the permanent case record. Julian walked in overflowing with confidence. Why wouldn't he? He thought he was untouchable. Vance asked him to confirm his original sworn statement. Julian confidently repeated his lies, reiterating that I was the thief. Then, Vance opened my binder. Vance showed Julian the IP logs. He showed him the device authentication records. He showed him the routing numbers proving the stolen money paid for his Tesla. He showed him the travel records proving I was in Chicago when the $2,000 transfer was made from Julian's living room. Julian's face allegedly went completely gray. He demanded a lawyer and refused to answer any more questions. By Wednesday afternoon, the district attorney's office officially closed the investigation into me, and opened a formal grand jury investigation into Julian Hayes for felony theft, wire fraud, and filing a false police report. When Sarah called to tell me the news, I shut my office door and just sat in the quiet. I didn't feel victorious, I just felt a hollow, exhausting relief. Like surviving a car crash you never saw coming. I called my mom that evening. She already knew. Julian had called her the second he left the precinct, sobbing and spinning a new web of lies. Ethan, her voice was completely shattered. Julian says the police are confused. He says there's been a massive misunderstanding. Mom, it is not a misunderstanding. He says the account was joint. He says he had a legal right to use it for emergencies, and he was just borrowing it. He used it to pay his credit card bills and his car lease for 3 years. Mom, $53,000. Dead silence on the line. The kind of silence where you can hear a heart breaking. That can't be right, she whispered, sounding small and terrified. I have seen the bank records, Mom, every transaction, every date, every dollar. He has been systematically draining your retirement. And when Dad noticed the missing money, Julian looked you in the eye and told you I did it, just to save himself. She started crying. Not her usual dramatic, attention-seeking crying. This was a quiet, gutted, soul-deep sobbing. The sound of a woman realizing her entire perception of reality was a lie. Why didn't you tell us? She gasped. Because you wouldn't have believed me, Mom, I said gently but firmly. You told me not to ruin the family over a mistake. Remember? She didn't answer. I could hear my dad in the background, his voice frantic, asking what was wrong. I have to go, Mom, I am so sorry this happened. I truly am. I hung up the phone. Over the next few months, the illusion of Julian's perfect life violently unraveled. He had to hire a real, incredibly expensive criminal defense attorney. When Chloe found out the true extent of their financial ruin, and realized the Maldives trip was funded by stolen retirement money, she packed her bags and moved in with her sister. Last I heard, she served him with divorce papers. My parents had to go down to the bank and sit through a grueling 3-hour meeting where the fraud department walked them through every single unauthorized withdrawal. Mom cried until she physically threw up. Dad sat there in stoic silence, staring at the numbers, realizing he had let his wife's favoritism blind him to a predator in his own home. Julian called me exactly once during the legal proceedings. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I picked up. You couldn't have just let it go. He hissed into the phone. He didn't sound angry, he sounded genuinely baffled. Like he could not comprehend why I hadn't just accepted being the sacrificial lamb. You filed a police report saying I committed a felony, Julian. I could have lost my CPA license. I could have gone to prison. I was going to pay it back, he yelled. I just needed time. Your plan was to frame me. I was your plan. He had absolutely nothing to say to that. The silence stretched for 10 seconds before I hung up and blocked his number forever. Because the account was technically a joint account, the theft charges were incredibly complicated to prosecute. His lawyer successfully argued that Mom had willingly given him access. But the charge for filing a false police report? That was bulletproof. He had lied to a detective, on the record, with malicious intent. Julian eventually took a plea deal to avoid jail time. He got 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent criminal conviction on his record. He lost his lucrative medical sales job because nobody wants to hire a rep with a fraud conviction. He is currently working at a mid-tier car dealership, desperately trying to pay court-ordered restitution to my parents. My parents and I have a relationship now, but it is completely different. It is smaller, it is fragile, but it is finally honest. Mom calls me once a week, but she doesn't dominate the conversation anymore. She asks about my work, my house, my life. She never mentions Julian. I know she is in intense weekly therapy to deal with the betrayal. Dad is in therapy too, which shocked me. About 4 months after the plea deal, Dad called me on a random Tuesday. Hey bud. Hey, Dad. He cleared his throat, and I could hear the immense weight of the last year in his voice. I owe you an apology, Ethan, a real one. Not the kind where I mumble something and hope you forget about it. He took a deep breath. I should have asked much harder questions when that money went missing. I should have known you better than to believe you would ever steal from us. And when you looked me in the eye and told me you were innocent, I should have fought for you. Instead, I let your mother smooth it over because I was a coward. I failed you as a father, and I am so sorry. I stood in my kitchen, looking out at my small backyard, and felt a massive, suffocating knot in my chest finally loosen. Thanks, Dad, I said, my voice thick. That means a lot to me. Do you want to come over for dinner this Sunday? Just you, me, and Mom. I'm making a brisket, no drama, just dinner. Yeah, Dad. I'd really like that. I didn't blow up my family. My brother did that all by himself. I just followed the money. After all, it's what I do for a living. My parents actually looked me in the eye and demanded I pay for my brother's wedding to the woman I had just caught him with in my own bed. I smiled, told them no, and spent the next 4 years quietly acquiring the massive debt that was keeping his miserable life afloat, just so I could sit back and watch gravity do the rest. I am 33 years old, and I run a data analytics firm called Apex Analytics. Most of my family thinks I work some boring, mid-level computer IT job. They aren't entirely wrong that my day-to-day work is incredibly boring to explain at a dinner party. They are, however, very wrong about the mid-level part. My company cleared 8 figures last year, specializing in predictive consumer behavior models and supply chain logistics. I have never talked numbers with my family. I have always preferred to keep my head down, do my work, and avoid the spotlight. That is a habit that is about to make a lot more sense by the end of this post. I was exactly 6 weeks away from marrying Elena. We had been together for 3 years. She ran her own boutique event planning business. She was incredibly good at her job, but she was even better at making me laugh after I had endured a brutal, 80-hour workweek. I truly thought I knew her. I thought I knew a lot of things. My brother, Tristan, is 29, 4 years younger than me, and he has always been the one my parents actually talk about at family gatherings. Tristan is the undisputed golden boy. He runs a regional construction company called Sterling Builders that is perpetually just about to take off. He is charming in that specific, magnetic way where rooms just naturally tilt toward him the moment he walks in. He has also been practically broke since he was 22 years old, and my parents have quietly funded that charm and his failing business ventures for a decade. I never resented it much. I had my own thing going. I didn't need the attention, and I certainly didn't need their money. That Thursday, I managed to leave the office early. We had our official cake tasting scheduled for Saturday, but the high-end caterer we hired called me to say they had a sample tray ready that same afternoon. I thought, why not surprise her? I could grab the samples, bring them home, and do the whole spontaneous, romantic surprise thing. I actually stopped at a boutique wine shop first. I picked out a $150 bottle of Cabernet that I knew she absolutely loved. I was in a genuinely fantastic mood. I want you to sit with that specific detail for a second because it matters immensely for what comes next. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't checking up on her. I didn't have a single bad feeling in my gut. I was just happy, looking forward to spending an afternoon with my future wife. I let myself into the house. It was dead quiet. Her car was parked in the driveway, so I figured she was upstairs, maybe taking a shower, or maybe just reading a book in bed. I took the stairs 2 at a time with the expensive wine bottle in one hand, and the pristine white box of pastry samples in the other. I was already rehearsing some dumb, cheesy line to say when I opened the bedroom door. The door was already half open. I heard the sounds before I saw anything, and for one full, desperate second, my brain tried to build me a logical excuse. Maybe the television was on. Maybe she was watching a movie. Maybe she was on a weird phone call. Then, I pushed the bedroom door open the rest of the way, and my brain completely stopped trying to protect me. Elena was in our bed. Tristan was with her. I want to be very clear about something right now, because if you have read stories like this on the internet before, you are probably expecting me to describe some massive, cinematic freeze-frame moment. You are expecting both of them to start screaming, for me to drop the wine bottle, for glass to shatter everywhere, for a massive physical altercation to break out. None of that happened. The wine bottle stayed perfectly gripped in my hand. I didn't say a single word. I didn't drop anything. I just stood there in the doorway for maybe 4 seconds. It was long enough, for both of them, to freeze and notice me. It was long enough to watch the exact moment the blood completely drained from my brother's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Elena said my name. Just my name, nothing else, whispered in this terrified tone like saying it out loud might magically undo what I was currently looking at. I walked over to the dresser. I set the wine bottle down on the wood. Carefully, deliberately, like it mattered. Then I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and I took 3 clear photographs. Tristan scrambled backward and actually said, "Julian, wait, please, let me explain." I didn't answer him. I didn't answer either of them. I have thought about this specific moment 100 times since it happened, trying to figure out why I didn't scream, why I didn't put my fist through the drywall, why I didn't grab him by the throat and do all the things you would expect from a man who just watched his fiancée and his own flesh and blood brother defiling his bed. The honest answer is that somewhere in the 4 seconds I stood in that doorway, something deep inside of me went very cold and very quiet, and it has stayed exactly that way ever since. I turned around, walked down the carpeted stairs, walked out the front door, and got into my car. I sat there in the driveway for a minute, the engine off, my hands steady on the leather steering wheel, staring at absolutely nothing. Behind me, through the second-story window, I could see frantic movement. Tristan was probably scrambling around for his clothes, Elena was probably already sobbing hysterically, both of them undoubtedly waiting for me to come storming back inside and blow the house up. I wasn't going back inside. I opened my contacts list instead, scrolled past every single name that didn't matter right now, and stopped on one specific contact. My attorney picked up on the second ring. "Julian," he said. "Everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice completely dead. "But it is about to be handled. I need you to start with the ring." My attorney's name is Marcus Vance. I have used his firm for complex business contracts and corporate acquisitions for years. I had never used him for anything personal, but he didn't miss a single beat. "The ring?" he repeated, his tone shifting instantly. "Talk to me." "I just caught my brother in my bed with Elena," I told him. My voice was completely flat. There was no shaking, no crying, just presenting the facts in chronological order. He let me finish the brief summary, then said the exact thing I needed to hear in that moment. "Okay. I can have a private courier and an associate at the house within the hour to legally recover the ring, assuming you still have the proof of purchase and it is titled solely in your name, which, knowing how you operate, it is." It was. I don't buy anything without an extensive paper trail. That paranoid business instinct was about to save me a massive amount of grief. "Do it," I said. "And I need the joint wedding accounts frozen immediately. Vendor payments, too. Whatever hasn't cleared the bank yet, kill it." "You want to talk this through first?" Marcus asked gently. "Sometimes a night of sleep changes perspective, Julian. I just watched my brother in bed with my fiancée," I replied. "There is no version of tonight where I sleep on it. Burn it down, Marcus." He went quiet for a fraction of a second, then switched fully into relentless corporate litigation mode, which is the thing I respect most about him. "Understood. Give me 40 minutes. I drove straight to my office instead of going anywhere near the house. I parked in the underground garage under the harsh fluorescent lights, opened my laptop on the passenger seat, connected to the hotspot, and started working through my own checklist while Marcus worked through his. First, the joint bank account. Elena and I had opened one 8 months ago specifically for wedding expenses, both of us feeding it monthly. I logged into the banking portal, verified the balance of $68,450, and moved every single cent of my direct contributions into a private account she couldn't touch. Then, I flagged what remained for review and froze the account, which my private bank was more than happy to do given it was flagged as a joint account with a large, disputed upcoming disbursement. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even aggressive. It was just fast. Second, the vendors, the venue deposit, the luxury caterer, the string quartet, the florist. 4 calls, 4 voicemails left with nervous receptionists. I left the exact same message every single time. "This is Julian. Payment is on hold pending a severe personal matter. The wedding is cancelled. More information will follow within 48 hours. Nobody argued. High-end vendors deal with cancelled weddings much more often than people think. Third, the locks. I called a commercial locksmith I had used before for my office building. I told him it was an absolute emergency and offered to pay him triple his usual rate for same-night service. He said he could be at my house by 9 p.m. By the time I pulled my car back into my own driveway, it was just past 7 p.m. Tristan's truck was gone. Elena's car was still parked there. Through the large bay window, I could clearly see her sitting at the kitchen table, her phone gripped tightly in her hands. She wasn't typing, she was just holding it, staring at the screen, crying. I didn't go in. I stood on the porch in the evening air and texted her instead. "The engagement ring goes to Marcus tonight. You have until the locksmith arrives at 9 p.m. to get your things out of my house. I will wait in the car." She came running out 4 minutes later, her eyes bloodshot and swollen, and she actually tried to say something to me. I held up a single hand before she could even get a full sentence out of her mouth. "I am not doing this on your timeline," I said, my voice like ice. "Not tonight. Get your things. Julian, please. You don't understand, it's not what you. I have 3 high-resolution photographs that disagree with you, Elena." She completely stopped talking after that. She just choked on a sob, turned around, and went back inside to pack. While she frantically packed her life into boxes, I sat in my car and did the absolute last thing on my list. I pulled up the 3 photos I had taken, I picked the 2 least explicitly graphic ones, attached them to a new email, and sent it to both families in one single message. My parents, her parents. 2 short lines of text. Tristan and Elena were together in my bed this evening. I have attached the proof. The wedding is off, effective immediately. I hit send before I could even think twice about how that single email was going to completely detonate 2 households at the exact same time. The locksmith showed up right on time at 9 p.m. Elena left with 2 large suitcases and her car. There was no tearful goodbye, no final word of closure, just a long, pathetic look at me from the end of the driveway that I did not return. By 9:30 p.m., the heavy-duty deadbolts were installed. By 10 p.m., Marcus confirmed the engagement ring was fully recovered. His associate had driven directly to Tristan's apartment. Tristan, apparently too stunned and terrified to fight it, handed the $25,000 ring over without a single word. I genuinely thought that would be the end of the night. I actually thought, for about 20 blissful minutes, that the absolute worst of it was already behind me. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go straight to voicemail. She called again immediately. I let that one go, too. The third time, it wasn't a phone call. It was a text message from my father. My father is a man who has called me maybe 4 times in the last 2 entire years and texted me even less. His text was exactly 6 words. There was no punctuation beyond a harsh period at the end. We'll discuss how to fix this quietly. I sat there in the dark of my car, staring at the glowing screen, waiting for the part where he asked if his son was okay. It never came. I stared at that text message long enough that the screen dimmed and shut off twice. We'll discuss how to fix this quietly. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm so sorry this happened. Not, even, what the hell is going on? Just pure, unadulterated damage control, as if I was a PR problem for the family instead of his betrayed son. I didn't respond that night. I let the silence sit until Sunday afternoon, when my mother called for the 9th time. I finally picked up the phone just to stop the relentless noise. You are doing this family dinner whether you like it or not, she said sharply. There was no hello. There was no asking how I was holding up. Sunday at 6 p.m. Your father is cooking. We need to sit down and talk like adults. I almost laughed out loud. Like adults. Coming from a woman who hadn't asked a single time how I was surviving the destruction of my future. But I went. Partly out of morbid curiosity, and partly because I wanted to watch this insane delusion play out in person instead of trying to guess at it through text messages. The house smelled like the expensive garlic and rosemary roast my father only makes twice a year. Tristan was not there, which told me they had at least thought that far ahead to keep us separated. My mother hugged me at the front door like absolutely nothing had happened, which was its own special kind of sickening insult. We sat at the dining table. Nobody touched the food for the first 10 excruciating minutes. Finally, my father cleared his throat and started. We have all had time to think, he said, using his deep, authoritative voice like this was a corporate business restructuring. And obviously, what happened is deeply regrettable. Regrettable? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. But you have to think about the optics here, Julian. The wedding was public. People know the date, the invitations are already half sent out, the deposits are paid. The wedding is off, I said slowly, as if speaking to a toddler. There is no optics problem because there is no wedding. My mother leaned forward, her eyes wide with frantic anxiety. That is exactly the problem, Julian. If you cancel everything outright at the last minute, people will ask why. They will dig. They will find out what Tristan did. Do you understand what a scandal like that does to this family's reputation in the community? I actually waited for the twist. I waited for the moment where she pivoted her anger toward Tristan, the son who had actually caused the scandal. It never came. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye, and said the single sentence I have replayed in my head more than any other sentence anyone has ever spoken to me in my entire life. We think the right thing, the mature thing, is for you to still cover the wedding costs. Let Tristan and Elena move forward with it, quietly. No scandal, no whispers. Everyone saves face. As. I sat completely frozen. I actually laughed. It wasn't a big, booming laugh. It was a short, breathy, utterly disbelieving laugh that escaped my lungs before I could stop it. You want me, I said, enunciating every single syllable slowly, to pay for the wedding between my brother and the woman I caught him having sex with? In my own bed? It keeps the peace, my father said firmly, like that phrase magically settled the entire debate. You are the reasonable one, Julian. You have always been the reasonable one. That word, reasonable. That word had been doing a massive amount of heavy lifting in this family for a very long time. Reasonable meant the son who doesn't need anything. Reasonable meant the son who absorbs the pain. I had been reasonable through every single financial bailout they had quietly handed Tristan over the years. Every time his construction company needed a desperate cash injection, nobody called it a loan. Every single holiday where his repeated failures got reframed as ambition and my actual, tangible successes got mentioned in one passing sentence before the conversation inevitably moved back to him. I looked at both of them for a long, suffocating moment. Then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a cold, dead, terrifying smile. My mother actually flinched at it, like she understood somewhere underneath her performance that she had just miscalculated incredibly badly. "No," I said. "Julian, please." I said no. And I want to be very, very clear about something. Since apparently I haven't been clear enough for the last 33 years, I am completely done being reasonable. I stood up from the table, left the expensive roast entirely untouched on my plate, walked out the front door, and drove home. That night, I opened my private banking dashboard and looked at the massive wedding fund I had already quietly diverted. Every single dollar I had earmarked for the luxury venues, the high-end catering, the 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives, all of it was sitting in a holding account waiting for a decision. I moved it. All of it. Straight into Apex Analytics Corporate Expansion Fund, the exact fund my board of directors had been begging me to grow for 2 years. Then, I blocked my parents' phone numbers. I blocked Tristan's number. I archived every single family group chat. I changed my emergency contacts. I did not speak a single word to any member of my family again for 4 entire years. Edit. Since a few of you are asking in the comments. 1. Did Elena ever try to fight for the house or the money? No. The house was purchased solely in my name 2 years before I even met her. The joint account was 90% funded by my income, and I had Marcus send her a legally binding ledger proving I only took my exact contributions. She knew better than to drag me to court when I had photographic evidence of her infidelity that could be used in civil proceedings regarding the cancelled wedding contracts. 2. Why didn't you punch him? Because physical assault is a crime that gets you arrested, sued, and puts your business at risk. I am a data analyst. I calculate risk for a living. Punching him would have felt good for exactly 10 seconds. What I did instead felt good for 4 years. Update 1. I built. That is the absolute only way I can describe those 4 silent years. I put my head down, I shut out the noise, and I built my empire. Apex Analytics went from a highly profitable mid-size firm to something genuinely dangerous and predatory in our industry. We became the kind of massive tech company that other firms started acquiring smaller competitors just to stand a chance against. 4 years is a very long time to not think about people. I mostly succeeded. I dated occasionally, traveled extensively, and focused entirely on the data. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in a high-level acquisition review meeting with my head of investments. Her name is Sylvia Chen. She is brilliant, ruthless, and has been with me since year 2. We were reviewing the client book of a firm we were about to buy out when a name came across the deal sheet that made me go completely, deathly still. Sterling Builders. Tristan's company. The financial summary attached to the name was catastrophic. They were absolutely drowning in high-interest debt, quietly shopping for a desperate bailout from a subprime investment firm my company had been aggressively circling for months. I didn't say anything for a good 10 seconds. I just stared at the projected default dates on the spreadsheet. Sylvia must have noticed a micro-expression on my face because she immediately paused the deal walkthrough and lowered her tablet. "Do you know them?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "I know the name," I said. That was true enough. The firm in question that we were acquiring was called Crestview Capital, a mid-size investment and lending house that had been quietly keeping a handful of struggling, incompetent regional businesses on life support. Sterling Builders was one of their worst offenders. Crestview itself was severely undercapitalized, and desperately looking for a larger acquirer to save them from insolvency. We had been circling Crestview solely for its lucrative client book and data infrastructure, not for anything sentimental. That part is incredibly important. I want to be crystal clear. I was not actively chasing my brother across 4 years. I didn't hire private investigators. I didn't stalk his LinkedIn. He just happened to be standing inside a burning building that I was already in the process of buying. "Do you want me to pull this specific asset from the short list?" Sylvia asked, sensing my hesitation. "We can exclude them from the acquisition package if they are a conflict." I thought about that for much longer than I probably should have. Pulling Sterling Builders from the deal would have been the clean, professional move. It would be the move that kept my personal life fully quarantined from my business empire. But something dark inside of me, the exact same cold, quiet, calculating thing that had shown up 4 years earlier in a bedroom doorway, didn't want clean. It wanted information. It wanted leverage. "No," I said, my voice smooth. "Move forward with the full acquisition. Standard process. I just don't want my name anywhere near this specific account publicly. Bury the ownership structure under the holding entity." She didn't ask why. That discretion is exactly one of the reasons I pay her an exorbitant salary. We closed on Crestview Capital 11 weeks later. We routed the purchase through a secondary holding entity that had Apex Analytics fingerprints nowhere on the publicly visible paperwork. Overnight, Tristan's failing construction company became, entirely without his knowledge, a direct client of mine. I owned his debt, I owned his leverage, I owned his future. I didn't call him to gloat, I didn't email him. I didn't do a single thing that would tip him off to the fact that his estranged brother was now the invisible hand wrapped tightly around his financial throat. Because, honestly, I didn't need to do anything at all. That is the fundamental part nobody in my family ever understood about me. I don't need to actively push people toward their own collapse. I just need to stop propping them up and let physics take over. And Tristan had been propped up for a very, very long time. Here is exactly what my quiet ownership let me see. Over the following months, through routine portfolio reviews that I had zero legal obligation to read as closely as I did, I realized Sterling Builders wasn't just struggling due to a bad market. It was completely hollowed out by sheer incompetence and greed. I found loan applications with wildly inflated income figures that absolutely did not match their official tax filings. I saw a revolving, desperate pattern of taking out new, high-interest debt specifically used to quietly pay off the interest on old debt, a classic Ponzi-style survival tactic. I found 2 massive lawsuits from regional subcontractors who had gone unpaid for 6 months, both settled fast and quiet out of court. Those are the exact kind of desperate settlements you make when you are absolutely terrified of anyone looking closer at your books. I said nothing. I authorized nothing beyond standard, emotionless portfolio management. I let the loans renew on the exact same terms Crestview's underwriters had already set before we ever bought the place. I was, on paper, an invisible landlord sitting in the dark, watching a house I used to live in slowly catch fire from the inside. Meanwhile, from what little information filtered to me through mutual acquaintances I never asked about but somehow still heard from, Tristan and Elena had officially gotten married 8 months after the wedding I had walked away from. My parents had apparently thrown themselves into funding and celebrating it like absolutely nothing had ever gone wrong. Like there hadn't been 3 graphic photographs. Like I had simply stepped out of the family story on my own accord and everyone else cheerfully got to move on without me. Tristan was, by every outward account, living large. He drove a brand new $90,000 truck. They bought a massive new house he definitely couldn't afford on his razor-thin construction margins alone. It was the exact kind of flashy lifestyle that looks like immense success right up until someone actually checks the raw numbers, which nobody in my family had ever been inclined to do. Update 2. It was Elena who finally checked the numbers. I only know this because Sylvia flagged it directly to me 18 months into our ownership of Crestview Capital. A formal request had come through one of our client-facing junior analysts. A woman was asking highly pointed, incredibly specific questions about her husband's business financials and loan covenants. The kind of aggressive questions that strongly suggested she already suspected something was deeply wrong and wanted documentary confirmation rather than just information. Should I have someone from legal reach out to guide her through the disclosures? Sylvia asked, standing in my office. Given the account is sensitive. No, I said, not looking up from my monitor. Just answer what she is legally entitled to see as a spouse. Nothing extra. Nothing withheld. Give her exactly what she asks for. 2 weeks after that request went through, one of our senior compliance analysts forwarded me a red-flagged file. It was the kind of internal alert that gets generated automatically by the system when a client's current financial disclosures violently contradict their earlier submissions. I opened the file expecting to see a routine banking discrepancy. What I found instead was a blatantly forged income statement with Tristan's signature on it, dated the exact same month he had secured his last major loan extension. And underneath it, buried in the same file, was a luxury apartment lease agreement. It was for a high-end downtown apartment that neither Tristan nor Elena had ever listed as an asset. The lease was co-signed by a name I didn't recognize at all, Chloe Sutton. The name meant nothing to me. I had Sylvia run a basic background check. Nothing invasive, just enough to confirm she was a real person and not a corporate shell entity. Chloe Sutton was a 24-year-old commercial real estate agent that Tristan's company had worked with on 2 recent commercial projects. That single document told me absolutely everything I needed to know about how it started, and absolutely nothing I needed to do about it. I didn't forward the file to Elena. I want to be completely honest about that fact because it would be incredibly easy to tell this story like I was a master manipulator who orchestrated her grand discovery, and I didn't. I made one decision, the exact same decision I had made from the very start. Don't interfere. Don't protect him. Don't warn anyone. Just don't obstruct whatever truth surfaces naturally. Our internal compliance analyst was legally required by federal procedure to loop in any joint account holder whose disclosures have been formally questioned. Elena had asked pointed questions. Procedure kicked in entirely on its own. I just didn't step in to stop it. 3 weeks later, Sylvia came into my office with an update I hadn't asked for but clearly needed to hear. Your brother's wife just hired an independent forensic reviewer, she said, closing my office door. Outside our firm entirely. She's not trusting us to tell her the truth, which honestly, given the state of that file, is incredibly smart of her. The forensic reviewer Elena hired went so much further than our own automated compliance flag had. He dug into the bedrock. He found 3 years of wildly inconsistent income filings. He found the disastrous pattern of new loans opened specifically to cover interest on older ones. And this is the part that apparently ended the marriage on the absolute spot. He found the paper trail for the second address that wasn't Chloe Sutton's real estate office. It was a private love nest. He found 6 months of luxury hotel charges before that, all buried under a business expense category that magically didn't match any client meetings on Tristan's calendar. Elena confronted him. I don't know exactly what was said in that house because I wasn't there, and I never asked anyone to tell me. But I heard the rough shape of it secondhand through Sylvia, who heard it from the forensic reviewer, who had been retained to keep meticulously documenting everything for what was clearly heading toward a vicious legal split. Tristan apparently denied it first. Then he tried to minimize it. Then, when the hotel charges and the co-signed lease were physically laid out on the kitchen table in front of him with exact dates, he stopped denying anything at all. Elena didn't just file for divorce. She went scorched earth. She forwarded absolutely everything: the forged income statement, the hidden lease, the catastrophic pattern of loans to Tristan's remaining business partners. These were 2 older men who had stuck with Sterling Builders through its rockier years out of misguided loyalty more than logic. She also sent the entire packet to Crestview's compliance department, which happened to be my Times compliance department, completely not knowing that detail at all. She wasn't trying to hurt him through me. She had absolutely no idea I was involved. She was just making sure nobody could ever pretend this hadn't happened. It was the exact same instinct I had had 4 years earlier with 3 photographs and 2 emails. The partners walked away within a week. One of them released a short, brutal statement to a regional business paper, citing irreconcilable differences in financial transparency. That is the exact language corporate lawyers write when they mean, he stole from the company, and we are fleeing before the FBI arrives. 2 subcontractor lawsuits that had been lying dormant reopened almost immediately once word got out that Sterling Builders' finances were unraveling in the public eye. A third, entirely new lawsuit followed from an angel investor who had put money in based purely on those forged statements. My parents, who had spent 4 entire years telling anyone in town who would listen that Tristan was thriving and I was the difficult, jealous son who had abandoned the family over some petty misunderstanding, suddenly had a much bigger problem than my absence. An investigative piece was published in the local business journal. I only saw it because someone forwarded it to me unprompted from an old college contact. The article painstakingly traced a complex chain of wire transfers between my parents' retirement accounts and Tristan's business over the prior decade. Transfers that had never been declared properly to the IRS and looked, on paper, exactly like what they were: quiet, undocumented, illegal bailouts now hopelessly tangled up in an active corporate fraud investigation. Their entire retirement was gone, swallowed by Tristan's black hole of debt, and now they were facing tax penalties they couldn't afford. I read that article twice at my desk. I felt less satisfaction than I expected, and more of something closer to cold confirmation. It felt exactly like watching a rotted bridge finally give way and collapse into the river after years of everyone insisting the massive cracks were just cosmetic. My assistant knocked on my door that same afternoon. Your parents have been calling the main office line repeatedly for a week, she said, looking concerned. They won't say why. And there's something else. Tristan filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection this morning. Legal just flagged it because our holding entity is listed as his largest secured creditor. I didn't call my parents back. I instructed legal to handle the bankruptcy filing exactly like they would handle any other standard creditor notice. No special treatment, no special mercy, no vendettas. Just standard, merciless corporate process through the holding entity, the exact same way we would handle it for a total stranger. Tristan never found out the entity holding his massive debt traced back to me. As far as the bankruptcy filing was concerned, Apex Analytics was just a faceless corporate name on a list, one massive creditor among several, no different from the angry subcontractors and the furious investor in the banks. 6 months after that, we hosted the Apex Summit. Apex Analytics had just closed a massive new valuation that officially put our company past $1 billion. It is the kind of staggering number that gets written up in national trade press and pulls desperate people out of the woodwork who haven't spoken to you in years. We held the summit at a luxury hotel ballroom downtown. There were 300 VIP guests, industry press, half of our elite client roster, and a massive stage with our new foundation logo already projected up behind the podium before I had said a single word about it publicly. Sylvia ran the security clearance personally that night, which turned out to matter significantly more than either of us expected. I was backstage in the green room, going over my announcement speech one more time, when she came to find me, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. Your parents are outside, she said, her voice tight. At the main entrance barricades. They don't have credentials. How do they even know about tonight? I asked, adjusting my tie. The trade press covered the valuation heavily this week. I guess they saw a headline with your name on it and figured a public event meant an open door to ambush you. I thought about that for a second. 4 entire years of dead silence, and the very first time they actively tried to reach me in person since the bankruptcy filing wasn't a phone call, a letter, or an apology. It was showing up uninvited to a room full of cameras and journalists, betting their last dollar that I wouldn't cause a scene in front of 300 important people. That desperate bet told me absolutely everything about what they had actually learned. Nothing. Don't let them in, I said, my voice dead calm. Are you sure? Sylvia asked. Completely. Have security. Remove them from the premises. I walked out into a side hallway with a partial view of the glass entrance doors. I was close enough to see the commotion, but far enough back in the shadows that I stayed out of frame for anyone with a camera. My mother was doing most of the talking. She was gesturing frantically, clearly trying to explain who she was to the massive security guards, who just as clearly already had a strict digital list and knew she wasn't on it. My father stood slightly behind her, saying absolutely nothing, looking 20 years older than 4 years should account for. His posture was defeated. Neither of them saw me watching them from the shadows. I didn't feel the need to be seen. I had spent 32 years desperately needing this family to see me clearly, and I was finally done needing anything from them at all. They didn't get past the entrance. After a few humiliating minutes of arguing, security physically escorted them off the luxury property, and that was that. Inside the ballroom, the summit went exactly the way these massive corporate things go. I gave remarks about our exponential growth, hosted a panel on data ethics, and shook hands with a lot of names I recognized from the trade press over expensive drinks. When it came time for my closing remarks at the end of the night, I walked up to the podium and kept it short. I talked about the billion-dollar valuation for exactly 2 sentences, because nobody in that room needed convincing on that front. Then, I pivoted. I am announcing tonight the official launch of the Sterling Foundation, I said into the microphone, my voice echoing across the silent room. A dedicated grant fund aimed at entrepreneurs who have had to rebuild their lives and businesses after being catastrophically betrayed by the people they trusted most: business partners, family, whoever. We provide capital, mentorship, no strings attached, and no board seat required. I have personally been on both sides of that particular education. I know exactly how expensive betrayal is. The applause was polite, industry appropriate, the kind of clapping that happens whether or not people fully understand the subtext of what you just said. Only a tiny handful of people in that massive room would ever know what both sides actually meant. I didn't need the rest of them to know. I only needed the 2 people who had been standing outside a barricade to eventually hear about it secondhand. I needed them to read the name of the foundation times Sterling Times, and understand exactly what they had missed out on by choosing the wrong son. I heard later, through the exact same secondhand channels that had told me everything else over the years, that Tristan had been outside that night too. He was standing much further back than my parents, watching through the glass from behind the barricade line where the overflow crowd stood in the cold, trying to get a look at the massive summit they weren't invited to. He didn't try to get in. He didn't argue with security. Maybe he already understood there was no version of that night, or any night for the rest of his life, where the door opened for him. I never sent him a message. I never gloated. I never needed to. He had 4 years to enjoy a fake life he never actually built, and he spent every single one of those years standing on ground I had quietly stopped holding up. I didn't destroy my brother. I just stopped catching him, and gravity did the rest. My sister lied to our parents that I was expelled to have me disowned. 10 years later, I was the presiding judge, on her $450,000 fraud case. The booking photo in the file was printed in stark black and white, but I didn't need color to recognize her. Her chin was tilted at the exact same practiced, innocent angle she had used for our family Christmas cards for as long as I could remember. And I sat in my chambers at 7:40 in the morning, holding a thick manila case file with my own sister's face stapled to the inside cover. My hands weren't shaking yet. That physical reaction would come later, a delayed shockwave of a decade of buried grief. Right then, I just sat very still. The overhead fluorescent light was humming a low, mechanical tune. A cold cup of black coffee was sweating a dark ring onto the printed case summary on my mahogany desk. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear a courthouse custodian running a heavy vacuum over the carpet, creating that particular, hollow pre-opening quiet a massive municipal building has before anyone official arrives for the day. I read the charging document twice, then a third time, scanning the text to make absolutely sure I wasn't inventing a bizarre coincidence out of a common name. I wasn't. The defendant was Maya Sterling, formerly Maya Vance. My sister. Wire fraud. 9 counts. Embezzlement from a registered nonprofit organization. 1 count. Nearly $450,000 moved in agonizingly small, calculated increments over 3 years, dressed up as legitimate vendor payments to a shell company that didn't exist. 10 years of absolute, suffocating silence hadn't prepared me for the particular kind of quiet that settles over a courtroom when the person who told your entire family you were a total disgrace realizes you are the one holding the gavel. But that quiet was still 2 hours away. First, you need to understand the architecture of our family, and how a malicious lie a 21-year-old girl told over a casual Sunday phone call mutated into a decade of total estrangement. Nobody in my family ever thought to question Maya. I had been the quiet one for as long as I could remember. I was the one who left for college 3 states away, moving from Ohio to Massachusetts, and stopped showing up for every minor family event. Maya, on the other hand, stayed close. She called every Sunday at exactly 6 p.m. She showed up with 3 bags of expensive groceries the week our mother had her gallbladder removed. She cried on cue at exactly the right moments, producing the kind of soft, tragic crying that made an entire room want to drop everything and protect her. And for a long time, I never once resented her for it. Not really. Because it was just who she had always been, and we had all accepted our roles. Our father had managed a local hardware store for 30 years before he finally retired. He was the kind of stoic, Midwestern man who measured love and reliability in physical presence and completed chores rather than spoken words. Our mother owned a small, struggling bakery 3 blocks from the house we grew up in. The heavy, sweet smell of vanilla extract and the sharp scent of roasted coffee beans were permanently baked into every single family gathering I could remember. Sunday dinners at their scuffed oak table ran the exact same way for 20 years. A heavy pot roast in the center. The local evening news muted on the small television in the background. Maya doing absolutely all of the talking, weaving elaborate stories about her week, while I quietly passed the side dishes and only answered when directly spoken to. And nobody in that warm, food-scented kitchen ever seemed to notice that one child in the room had somehow become part of the furniture. Maya had a terrifying gift that neither of my parents ever quite named out loud. She could walk into a room, instantly read the emotional temperature, figure out exactly what everyone in it desperately needed to hear, and say it a half second before anyone else even thought to. I used to deeply admire that about her. It took me years of therapy and distance to understand that this same exact gift worked just as well on people who deserved better from her as it did on people who deserved worse. I was in my 2nd year of law school when the fracture happened. I lived in a freezing, tiny studio apartment in Boston with a cheap coffee maker that violently leaked boiling water onto the linoleum counter every 3rd morning. I had stacks of instant ramen in the cabinet, and a massive corkboard over my cramped desk with complex case briefs pinned to it in 3 different colors of ink. I was exhausted, stressed, and entirely focused on surviving my torts and contracts classes. Then, the phone call came. It was from my father instead of my mother, which should have immediately told me something was terribly wrong before he even said a single word. He never called me directly. He didn't say hello. He just said that my mother had heard from Maya that I had been expelled. Maya had told them, with supposed tears in her eyes, that I had been caught blatantly cheating on a final contracts exam, that the law school was building a massive disciplinary file against me, and that I was too deeply embarrassed and ashamed to tell them the truth myself. He said it flatly, his voice devoid of warmth, like a man reading a grim weather report he didn't like but entirely believed. "Your mother's not doing well with this, Julian," he said. And I remember standing there, the leaky coffee maker hissing behind me, thinking it was incredibly strange that he led with my mother's feelings before he had asked me a single, solitary question about whether any of this insane accusation was actually true. I told him it wasn't true. I told him I was standing in my apartment, looking at my textbooks. I told him I could immediately email him my official, sealed transcript that exact same night. I offered to send my actual class ranking, which was in the top 10%. I offered to have a direct message sent from the university registrar if he wanted third-party proof. He just sighed, a heavy, disappointed sound, and said in that same flat voice that Maya wouldn't ever make something like that up. He said she had been the one showing up for this family for years, taking care of them, while I had abandoned them for the East Coast. He told me that maybe I should seriously think about why it was so incredibly easy for them to believe the absolute worst about someone who was already halfway gone from their lives. I should have caught the pattern sooner, honestly. When we were kids, Maya managed the metal coffee can where our 5th grade class kept the fundraiser money for a highly anticipated spring trip to the state capitol. She counted it out loud every single Friday afternoon in front of our teacher, Mrs. Gable, while the rest of us packed up our messy desks. When the can came up $14 short one random week, Maya didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. She just pressed both of her small hands over her mouth, widened her eyes, and said in a small, wet, trembling voice that she must have miscounted. She sobbed that she had been so incredibly careful, that she couldn't believe this nightmare was happening to her of all people, and that she felt like a failure. Mrs. Gable immediately crossed the classroom and put a comforting arm around Maya's shoulders before anyone else had even mentally processed what was missing. A quiet boy named Leo, who had done absolutely nothing but politely volunteer to count the can twice that same afternoon to help out, got quietly and permanently reassigned to a different, menial fundraising job for the rest of the year. I remember Leo telling me at recess, completely baffled and close to tears, that he still didn't understand what he had done wrong. I remembered that specific story for a very long time as a story about Maya being highly sensitive. It took me a decade of hindsight to understand it as a story about Maya being incredibly fast. My mother completely stopped answering my calls within that exact same week. My father sent one single text message a few days later. It read, "Don't contact your mother again until you're ready to be honest with us and apologize to your sister." I read that text standing in my freezing kitchen with a pot of water coming to a rolling boil behind me. I remember thinking, with a strange, detached, icy clarity, that I had two choices. I could spend my life fighting this, or I could just work. Fighting it required people who were actually willing to be convinced, and I didn't have any of those. So I worked. I stubbornly emailed my official, watermarked transcript to my mother's email address anyway, just once. I instantly got back an automated reply saying the account no longer existed. She had completely changed her email. I understood only years later that this was likely done on Maya's direct advice, to make it easier for my mother to hold the boundaries against her toxic, lying son. I tried calling my father's cell phone twice more over the following month. Both calls went straight to his voicemail. I didn't leave a message either time because I couldn't think of a single version of "it isn't true" that hadn't already completely failed me once. My hands were violently shaking the second time I hung up the phone. It was at the phone, an actual, uncontrollable physical shake that I had to wait out, sitting on the edge of my cheap mattress for 20 minutes before I could even pick up my study materials again. My law school's registrar, a soft-spoken, incredibly kind woman named Evelyn, who had helped me sort out a massive financial aid mix-up the year before, noticed my distress. She offered once to call my parents directly from her office line and confirm my excellent academic standing herself. I remember standing in her doorway, clutching my backpack, and turning her generous offer down. Some stubborn, deeply wounded, bleeding part of me had decided that if the truth needed a third party to be believed by my own parents, it wasn't really being believed at all. I think about that specific decision more than almost any other one I made that entire year. I still don't know if it was foolish pride, necessary self-protection, or whether by then there was much of a difference left between the two. That first Thanksgiving alone was agonizing. I ate a dry turkey club sandwich standing at the sticky counter of a glowing neon diner 3 blocks from my apartment. I couldn't stomach the thought of sitting in a booth by myself, watching happy, intact families laughing through the frosted window glass. I told myself that whole first year that the situation would eventually blow over. I convinced myself that the moment somebody actually called the school and asked for the records, the illusion would shatter. Nobody ever called the school. It is a profoundly strange, isolating thing to learn at 22 years old that the truth does not automatically defend itself. Somebody actually has to want to check. And my family didn't want to. 5 years into the suffocating silence, I made one final, desperate attempt at connection, and it's the one I still think about the most. A cousin on my mother's side got married in a large, gaudy banquet hall 2 towns over from where my parents lived. There were warm string lights, a rented polished oak dance floor, and a live band playing cheesy songs I half recognized from childhood weddings. I found out about the wedding entirely secondhand, through a mutual college friend who had married into that side of the family and assumed, quite reasonably, that I had already been invited. I wasn't. I went anyway. I drove for 2 hours, telling myself the whole way that I would just stand in the back near the coat check. I told myself that seeing them from a distance would be enough, that I absolutely wasn't there to make a dramatic scene, just to briefly exist in the exact same room as my own parents for 10 minutes after 5 years of not existing to them at all. I saw my father first. He was wearing a dark navy suit I instantly recognized from every major holiday of my childhood, laughing warmly at a joke someone made near the open bar. My mother was sitting at a decorated table near the front. For one long, agonizing second, her eyes swept casually across the crowded room and landed directly on me. I watched her brain register exactly who I was. I saw the flash of recognition. And then, I watched her look away deliberately. She didn't look angry, or sad, or shocked. She looked away the exact way you look away from a piece of furniture you've already decided you don't want to buy. The way you look away from something that simply isn't there. My chest went incredibly tight in a way I hadn't felt since that first year of law school. I stood by the heavy exit doors for maybe 4 agonizing minutes, my hands freezing cold, waiting for either of them to cross the room. Waiting for a nod, a gesture, anything. When neither of them did, I turned around, pushed through the doors, and left before the best man's toast even started. I drove 2 hours back to Boston in the pitch black without turning on the radio once. The silence in the car was deafening. I never tried again after that night. Some doors, I brutally learned, you can knock on exactly as hard as the person on the other side is willing to hear. I finished at the absolute top of my cohort. I walked across a massive stage in a rented black gown, with absolutely no one in the sprawling audience I was related to. It was a glaring fact I noticed much more sharply than I let myself show at the crowded reception afterward. I spent the afternoon making polite, hollow small talk with other students' parents about a family I didn't bother correcting anyone on. I immediately secured a prestigious clerkship for 2 years under Judge Marcus Thorne. He was a terrifying, brilliant man who had spent 34 years on the federal bench by the time I sat across from him at my initial interview. He was a man who aggressively read legal briefs with a red pen clenched tightly in his teeth, and he once told me that the law was the only family in the world that never asked you to lie for it. During my first month clerking, he asked me why nobody ever called the chambers on my birthday. He'd sharply noticed I never took the day off the way the other young clerks did to celebrate. I told him, very carefully and precisely, that my family and I weren't close. It was true in the driest, most technical sense a sentence can possibly be true. He didn't push it. Judges who have sat on the bench for 3 decades develop a highly specific, infallible instinct for which emotional doors are actually locked from the inside, and which ones just look that way. He seemed to decide correctly that mine was the first kind. There was one specific night, close to midnight, when the two of us were exhausted, finishing a complex bench memo on a corporate tax case that had absolutely nothing to do with either of us personally. He suddenly set his red pen down on the mahogany desk, looked at me over his glasses, and asked out of nowhere whether I had anyone waiting up for me at home. I came closer in that exact moment than I ever had before, or since, to completely breaking down and telling him the whole pathetic thing. The lie, the silence, the erased emails, the decade of being a ghost. I got as far as opening my mouth before deciding, once again, that the truth needed to belong only to me a little longer before I handed it to anyone else, even someone as safe and respected as Marcus Thorne. I just smiled tiredly and told him I was perfectly fine on my own. He looked at me a beat too long, the exact way perceptive people do when they absolutely know they're being given a heavily edited version of reality, and then he graciously let it go. I never told him a single detail about my family beyond that. I let him assume, the way everyone assumes about a driven young clerk with no visible family at graduation, that I simply didn't have much of one. And I let that easy assumption do the heavy lifting that the truth wasn't allowed to do anymore. I passed the bar exam with the highest score in my state cohort that year. I proudly framed the certificate in thick mahogany, hung it on my office wall, and mailed absolutely nobody a photo of it. I became an assistant prosecutor, grinding out grueling 60-hour weeks. Then I became a senior prosecutor. Then an appellate attorney, confidently arguing complex constitutional cases I used to only read about in heavy casebooks with cracked spines. For the first 3 years, I stubbornly sent birthday cards to my parents. It was a pathetic habit I kept even after the deafening silence made it feel a little insane. Just a standard card in the mail, with no return address they would have honored anyway. And then, quietly, I stopped. I stopped the year none of the previous 3 had ever been acknowledged in any way. I aggressively built a life that didn't ask their permission to be good. I told myself that the work, the respect of my peers, and the pursuit of justice was enough. Some weeks, it actually even was. A senior colleague at the prosecutor's office, a sharp, empathetic woman named Sarah, who had worked closely beside me for 4 years by then, asked me once over stale break room coffee whether I was close with my family. She asked it in the offhand, casual way people ask when they're really just making polite conversation between grueling hearings. I told her we didn't talk much, and I deliberately kept my eyes glued to the thick case file in my hands. She nodded slowly, read my body language, and let the subject drop the way most polite people did once they registered exactly how little room I left in the sentence. I got incredibly good over those long years at leaving exactly that much room and absolutely no more. Enough truth to end the probing question, but not nearly enough to invite a dangerous follow-up. 6 years into practicing law at the highest level, the governor's office called me about a sudden judicial vacancy on the county bench. The vetting process was brutal and took 4 agonizing months. There were deep financial disclosures, a rigorous bar standing review, and an intimidating in-person panel with 3 sitting judges. Then came the Governor's Judicial Appointments Council, led by a meticulous, terrifying man named Thomas Vance, who read my massive file like he was actively hunting for the one tiny crack that would sink the whole nomination. He found one. It wasn't the truth. It was a rumor. A vague, second-hand whisper some thorough background investigator had picked up from an old law school acquaintance who had apparently heard, years back, that I had left the university under a dark cloud of academic dishonesty. Vance called me back into his office for a second sit-down over it, entirely alone this time. No panel, just a thick manila folder and 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee that neither of us touched. He read the ugly allegation out loud, his voice flat and unembellished, the exact way I would later learn to read criminal charges into a public record myself. He looked me dead in the eye and asked me directly whether there was any truth to it at all. I didn't argue. I just calmly opened my briefcase and handed him the exact same sealed transcript, the exact same registrar's letter, and the exact same flawless paper trail that nobody in my own family had ever once asked to see. He put on his reading glasses and read it in absolute silence for a long, agonizing 2 minutes. Then, he took off his glasses, nodded once, and said, "That's the last we'll need to discuss this, Julian." He never brought it up again. It was the single most thorough, most respectful, and most fair hearing that specific lie had ever received. And it came from a total stranger who owed me absolutely nothing. I was officially sworn in at 35 years old, in a beautiful, wood-paneled courtroom with maybe 40 folding chairs set up for family and friends of the appointees. I remember standing there in my new black robe, counting without meaning to, exactly how many of those chairs were completely empty on the side where a loving family would have sat. Evelyn, my registrar from law school, actually came. Judge Thorne came, fully retired by then, walking slowly with a silver-tipped cane he stubbornly pretended he didn't need. He gave a short, incredibly dry toast about how the law rewards patience far more than it rewards raw talent. At the time, I took it as a massive compliment about my legal career, and only years later understood he might have meant it much more broadly than that. Nobody from my family came, because nobody from my family knew there was anything to come to. I shook 40 hands that afternoon, accepted the congratulations, and drove home to an impeccably clean, silent apartment with no one in it to tell. 10 years of total silence. I told myself sitting on the bench that I had finally made peace with it. It was the specific, highly structured peace of a man who has simply stopped checking a deep wound to see if it's healed, because the act of checking is its own specific kind of hurting. I didn't know, sitting in my chambers most mornings with my black coffee and my heavy docket, that absolutely all of it was about to land violently back in my courtroom, wearing a federal defendant's number. Update 1. The case file had come up through the normal, randomized computer rotation 2 weeks earlier. It was assigned by the clerk's office the exact way every single case was assigned. There was no red flag, no warning mark, absolutely nothing in our sophisticated conflict check system to catch it. Why? Because Maya had married 9 years ago and proudly taken her husband's last name. The judicial system checks names, not deeply buried family histories. I didn't even know that specific detail yet, that morning in chambers. I only knew a defendant named Maya Sterling was scheduled for a federal arraignment at 9:15 a.m., and that I had roughly 90 minutes to decide exactly what kind of man I was going to be about it. The nonprofit she defrauded was called the Oak Ridge Youth Alliance, a small, underfunded organization that ran vital after-school programs in 3 lower-income counties. Maya had worked there for 8 years as their financial director. She had been there long enough to become the one person everyone implicitly trusted to sign off on massive vendor invoices without a second set of eyes. Assistant U.S. Attorney Chloe Hastings, a brilliant woman with 11 years of experience prosecuting complex white-collar and public corruption cases, had meticulously built the case off an anonymous tip to the board about a vendor nobody could actually locate at its listed physical address. From there, the investigation was ruthlessly methodical. Bank records were aggressively subpoenaed under a grand jury order. A sophisticated shell company was traced to a remote P.O. box that Maya had opened under a slightly misspelled version of her own maiden name. The massive money transfers were broken down into smaller amounts, just under the $10,000 threshold that would have triggered an automatic banking compliance review. The government's lead forensic accountant, a man named Martin Hayes, who had spent 19 years auditing nonprofit and municipal fraud cases, had built the financial reconciliation the exact same patient, terrifying way any good forensic accountant does. He pulled 4 years of the organization's massive disbursement ledgers, meticulously matched each flagged invoice against a state vendor registry, and found, again and again, a fake business license number that traced back to absolutely nothing at all. His final report ran to 65 dense pages and established an unbreakable, clean chain of custody on every single forged document. It was the exact kind of flawless paper trail a defense attorney can desperately chip at, but never, ever really break. 9 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of embezzlement. The Oak Ridge board chair had reportedly wept openly while reading the financial summary aloud at an emergency meeting. That last detail was according to a specific line in the government's charging memo that had absolutely nothing to do with the rigid letter of the law, and everything to do with why any of this deeply mattered in the first place. I sat with the massive file open in front of me for far longer than I actually needed to, well past the point where reading it again was intellectually useful. I was doing it because some irrational, desperate part of my brain was still hoping the second reading would magically produce a different name. It didn't. At exactly 8:50 a.m., I picked up my phone and called Chief Judge David Carmichael. He was a man with 26 years on the state bench, and the one person any formal recusal in our courthouse absolutely had to go through. I told him, without much preamble or emotion, that the defendant scheduled for my 9:15 morning docket was my estranged sister, and that I fully intended to recuse myself on the permanent record the exact moment the case was called. Carmichael was completely quiet for a long second on the other end of the line. He wasn't disapproving, he was just doing the exact same rapid mental math I had already done. "Julian," he said slowly, "you could hand this file off right now. Quietly. Before anyone in the press pool sees your name attached to it at all. Nobody outside this specific office would ever need to know why you stepped away." I told him I had already thought about that, and I had. For about 4 agonizing seconds, standing by my chamber's large window with the heavy file in my hand, staring out at the city below, I had wanted badly, in some incredibly old, unrepaired, bleeding part of myself, to finally be the one person in the room who knew the whole absolute truth and got to say so out loud. It would have been so incredibly easy to just transfer it. Nobody would have ever caught it, and that was exactly why I couldn't do it. I told Carmichael that I wanted it on the official record. I wanted it in open court, where it would actually mean something profound, instead of just being another secret protecting me. He pulled up the judicial canon on his own computer screen while we talked. He read the relevant section back to me almost gently, as if he deeply suspected I already had it completely memorized and just desperately needed to hear it in someone else's voice to anchor myself. He said that my choice was the much harder road, but he deeply respected it. He also said he would have the courthouse media liaison ready on standby, just in case the aggressive press pool caught wind of the family name before I even got the chance to say it myself. I hadn't slept well the night before, completely unrelated to this. I had been up at 5:15 a.m., made a pot of coffee I didn't finish, and stood at my own kitchen counter, a much nicer marble one than the leaking studio setup from law school, but with the exact same nervous habit of drinking it lukewarm and highly distracted. I had driven to the courthouse taking the long way, purposely driving past the exact neon diner where I had eaten that first solitary Thanksgiving sandwich a decade ago. It was a route I usually avoided without quite admitting to myself why. I had sat in the dark parking garage for 4 full minutes with the engine completely off before I could force myself to walk into the building. At 9:10 a.m., my law clerk knocked softly on the door to say the courtroom was completely full. What was supposed to be a slow Tuesday docket had suddenly turned into a much busier one because a stringer from the local newspaper had been sitting in on an unrelated bail hearing earlier. According to the bailiff, the reporter had already started aggressively asking around about the Sterling case the exact moment the morning docket sheet was posted on the board. I had much less of a window than I had originally planned on. It was either going on the record in the next 5 minutes, or it was a massive headline breaking the story before I did, followed by a defense motion questioning whether I had maliciously tried to sit quietly on a case I should never have legally touched. I stood at the small, full-length mirror by my chambers closet for exactly as long as it took to straighten my heavy black robe, and not a single second longer. Looking at myself in the mirror for any real length of time felt like an emotional indulgence I didn't have 90 seconds to spare on. My throat was incredibly tight walking down the back hallway to the bench. My pulse was doing something erratic that I could physically feel pounding in my ears. It was a fast, dull thud that had absolutely nothing to do with nerves about the law itself. I knew the law here completely cold. I knew exactly what the judicial canon rigidly required, and I knew exactly how to phrase it cleanly and professionally. It was the other part, the deeply personal part with no legal citation, that had my hands freezing cold despite the heavy wool of the robe. 2 full decades of not knowing how this confrontation would go, and I was about to find out in front of 40 strangers and a hungry reporter with a notepad. My hands, notably, were still not shaking. It was a strange, highly specific steadiness. I noticed it the exact way you notice a sudden change in the weather. It was a factual observation about the moment, rather than a feeling I actually had the emotional room to sit inside of. Update 2. When I walked out of the heavy oak doors and onto the elevated bench, the courtroom did its usual, chaotic shuffle. Attorneys immediately stood up, thick stacks of paper rustled loudly, and the bailiff forcefully called the large room to order. The wooden gallery was much fuller than a standard Tuesday morning docket usually drew. There was a wide scatter of anxious families waiting on other minor matters. A young man with a laminated press badge clipped to his corduroy jacket pocket was taking up a prime aisle seat, his notebook already flipped open on his knee, pen poised. Maya walked through the side doors beside her expensive lawyer. She was meticulously adjusting her tailored blazer, looking completely composed, almost bored. It was the exact same flawless performance she had probably given our gullible parents 100 times across 100 kitchen tables. Her chin was perfectly level, her shoulders pulled back. She was a woman who had clearly spent a lifetime rehearsing looking unbothered, and had gotten incredibly good enough at it to fool almost any room she walked into. Her defense attorney was a man named Liam Croft. He had 16 years in high-stakes white-collar defense, and it took me a full, agonizing second longer than it should have to place his face. Because the last time I had seen Liam Croft, we were both 24 years old. He had been the exact guy back in law school who had heard the vicious cheating rumor entirely secondhand, and had quietly, cowardly stopped inviting me to his prestigious study group instead of just being a man and asking me about it himself. Liam was casually flipping through his own thick file as he walked toward the defense table, not yet looking up at the bench. I sat perfectly still, and I watched the moment arrive almost in slow motion. His eyes finally lifted from the typed papers, automatically finding the judge's bench out of ingrained habit the way any seasoned attorney does, and then, his eyes just stayed there. A half-second too long. I sat there, draped in black, and I watched a decade of quiet, comfortable, arrogant certainty completely rearrange itself behind his eyes in real time. It is a profound thing to witness the exact moment a man realizes he spent 10 years believing a devastating story he never once bothered to fact check. Then, Maya finally looked up. I watched the color completely drain out of her face the exact way water violently drains from a pulled tub. It was fast at first, and then, at the very end, it happened all at once. Her pristine, practiced mask entirely shattered. Liam leaned over and desperately whispered something frantic into her ear. Maya didn't respond to him. She just shook her head slightly, her eyes wide with absolute terror, still staring up at me like she was desperately waiting for the physical room to magically correct itself. Like she was waiting for someone to step in and explain the horrific mistake. The court clerk stood up and read the case aloud. The People versus Maya Sterling. The Honorable Judge Julian Vance presiding. She actually mouthed my first name as it echoed in the large room, like she still couldn't comprehend the reality of it. Mrs. Sterling, I said, leaning toward the microphone, keeping my voice exactly as flat, bored, and procedural as I would for any other random defendant on a Tuesday. Please rise for your arraignment. Her hands were violently shaking when she finally managed to stand up. Mine weren't. I read the severe charges into the permanent record. 9 counts of wire fraud. 1 count of embezzlement. I read the federal government's strong request that a high bail be set given her specific flight risk profile. I recited every single word in the exact same even, monotonous cadence I used for every single arraignment. I did it because the alternative was letting my voice do something emotional that I could never take back once the court reporter had it permanently typed into the public transcript. I have read terrible charges into the record hundreds of times in my career. I have never before had to consciously, painfully decide, sentence by agonizing sentence, not to let a single ounce of emotion show. Then, before Liam Croft could even take a step toward the wooden podium to enter a plea, I looked directly at the court reporter and stated firmly for the record, I am recusing myself from this case, effective immediately, due to a direct family relationship with the defendant. I said it the exact way you would read any other mundane line off a printed docket sheet. There was absolutely no inflection, no dramatic eye contact with Maya. I held the silence in the room a beat longer than necessary. Saying those exact words meant admitting an open, public court, in the exact same county where my parents still lived, that Maya Sterling, the accused fraudster, was my sister. And that I, the presiding federal judge, was the exact same brother she had proudly told everyone was a disgraced, pathetic dropout a decade ago. Chief Judge Carmichael had a replacement judge physically in the building inside of 20 minutes. Maya was released later that exact same afternoon on a $50,000 bond, with a strict travel restriction and a surrendered passport, which was completely standard for the severity of the charges. None of that happened in front of me. I had already signed the official recusal order and walked calmly back to my chambers by the time any of it occurred. I passed AUSA Chloe Hastings in the busy hallway on my way back. She was quickly gathering her own thick files for the reassigned hearing. She stopped just long enough to look me in the eye and say that she thought I had handled it the exact right way. She said it was clean, perfectly on the record, with absolutely no unnecessary theater about it. She casually mentioned that she had seen older judges in much smaller conflicts than this one try to slide a case sideways without ever having the guts to say why. It wasn't warmth, exactly. It was the specific, rare respect one hardened professional gives another for doing the much harder, completely transparent thing when the cowardly, easier one was sitting right there for the taking. The story ran in the local newspaper 2 days later. It was 3 concise paragraphs in the county section, mostly detailing the mechanics of the nonprofit fraud itself. There was exactly 1 sentence at the very end noting that the judge originally assigned to the high-profile case had immediately recused himself, citing a direct family relationship with the defendant. There was no further sensational detail, because I had strictly asked the clerk's office to give the hungry reporter absolutely nothing further, and Carmichael had forcefully backed that up without being asked twice. Carmichael also confirmed on the record, when that same reporter called his office directly fishing for drama, that the recusal had been handled perfectly by the book and the case reassigned the exact same morning. It was a fact Chloe Hastings' own office repeated almost verbatim when aggressively asked whether the prosecution's timeline had been affected in any way. It hadn't. The massive weight of the federal case moved forward exactly as it would have with any other defendant. Which was, in the absolute end, the entire point of standing up in open court and saying the words out loud instead of finding a quieter way around them. It was enough. 3 short paragraphs in a local paper was enough for my mother to finally find it, or for some gossiping neighbor to send it to her. Because she called my cell phone for the first time in 10 years. The following evening. It was a phone number I still had saved, completely unchanged, for the entire decade. I answered it on the 3rd ring. She didn't apologize, she didn't say hello. She just asked quietly, her voice much smaller and frailer than I remembered it. Older, too, in the specific, heartbreaking way 10 hard years does to a voice you haven't heard in that long. Is it true, Julian? She asked, her breath catching. All of it? I stood by my kitchen window, looking out at the city lights. Which part? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The part where I was never actually expelled from law school and became a judge? Or the part where your golden daughter stole $450,000 from a children's charity? She didn't have an answer for either. She just cried softly into the receiver, the same soft, tragic crying Maya used to do. But this time, it didn't make me want to protect her. I hung up the phone. Liam Croft called my direct chambers line himself a week later. He called on a minor matter that had absolutely nothing to do with Maya's case. It was a standard scheduling question on an unrelated corporate file, something about a discovery deadline neither of us particularly cared about. And at the very end of the call, almost as a heavy afterthought, his voice completely dropping out of its usual, confident courtroom register, he said he was deeply sorry, for whatever it was worth. He admitted that he had never once picked up the phone and asked me directly, instead of just letting the ugly story make sense of itself in his head. He said he had thought about it a lot since the arraignment. He had turned it over in his mind the exact way you turn over any massive assumption you're deeply embarrassed to find out was never actually checked. The exact same way I imagine he once turned over a study group invitation email he cowardly decided never to send. I told him it was a long time ago. I kept it professional. I didn't tell him that it had taken 10 full years and a massive federal wire fraud indictment for anyone in my life to finally do that basic math out loud. Maya eventually took a plea deal. 18 months in federal prison, full financial restitution to the Oak Ridge Youth Alliance, the standard, heavy conditions. I wasn't in the courtroom for her sentencing, and I absolutely didn't need to be. I had already gotten out of one 90-second arraignment hearing what 10 agonizing years of silence had never once managed to give me. The truth was finally sitting somewhere everyone in the room could clearly see it. It was an accident, my mother lied as I lay with broken bones. Then the police played the recording that destroyed our family and sent my brother to prison. I am Ethan, and I am 25 years old. Exactly 6 months ago, my life was violently shattered and then entirely rebuilt on the cold, unforgiving concrete of a hospital emergency stairwell. I was lying there at the bottom of the landing, gasping for air. Every single breath felt like a jagged, rusty knife twisting directly into my chest cavity. I could taste the sharp metallic flavor of copper pooling behind my teeth. My vision was swimming in dizzying dark circles, and my right arm was bent at a completely unnatural, horrifying angle. Above me, standing on the top landing like a conquering king looking over a battlefield, was my 29-year-old brother, Liam. He didn't look panicked. He didn't look remotely remorseful. He looked incredibly satisfied. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he casually reached up and dusted off the lapels of his expensive designer jacket, the exact same jacket my parents had bought him for his birthday using money they claimed they didn't have when I begged for help with my college tuition. "Aren't you perfect, Ethan?" Liam sneered, his dark, empty eyes staring down at me. "Always making everyone else look bad with your daily hospital visits and your pathetic little homemade care packages. You really think you can just swoop in and steal what is rightfully mine?" I tried to push myself up using my good arm, but the sheer force of the pain made my vision go entirely black. "Liam," I choked out, my voice sounding weak and pathetic. "Grandma is waiting for us. You need to help me up. Everything is about you, Ethan. It always has been," he spat, taking one deliberate step down toward me. "You are nothing but a roadblock." That was when his Oscar-worthy performance began. Liam reached into his tailored pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and completely changed his entire demeanor in a fraction of a second. The arrogant predator vanished, replaced by a frantic, innocent victim. He dialed a number, his hands shaking with artificial terror. "Mom, Dad, come quick to stairwell C." Liam cried into the phone, his voice cracking with manufactured panic and fake tears. Ethan fell down the stairs. I tried to grab his shirt, I tried to catch him, but I couldn't reach him. He just slipped. "Please hurry, there is so much blood." Less than a minute later, the heavy metal fire doors on the bottom landing flew open with a deafening crash. My mother and father burst into the stairwell. For a brief, incredibly foolish second, a wave of relief washed over me. My parents were here. They would call a doctor. They would help me. I was so incredibly wrong. My mother didn't even glance at the blood pooling near my head. She didn't look at my twisted arm or my bruised face. She sprinted directly past me, her expensive heels clicking sharply on the concrete, and threw herself at Liam. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, pulling his head to her shoulder. "Oh my God, Liam, my sweet boy, you poor thing," she cried, kissing his cheek repeatedly as if he were the one bleeding on the floor. "You must have been so incredibly scared watching your brother fall like that. It is okay, sweetie. You are safe, Mom is here. Don't look at it, it will just traumatize you more." My father walked slowly down the steps. He stopped right next to my head. He didn't kneel down to check my pulse. He just stood there, towering over me, glaring down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disappointment. "Ethan, what in the world were you thinking?" My father scolded, his tone laced with absolute disgust. "Running in a stairwell at your age? You know your brother has high blood pressure. You could have given him a severe panic attack with this reckless stunt. You are always causing unnecessary drama. I forced my eyes open, staring at his expensive leather shoes. I didn't fall, I whispered, the pain making my voice raspy and broken. I didn't run, Liam. He pushed me. He shoved me with both hands. Don't you dare. Liam interrupted instantly, burying his face deeper into our mother's shoulder, fake tears streaming down his face. I tried to save you, Ethan. I almost fell down the stairs myself trying to grab your jacket. How can you lie about this? Why do you always try to make me the bad guy? My mother's face hardened into a mask of pure venomous fury. Stop it right now, Ethan. Just shut your mouth. Your brother is traumatized enough without you making up malicious, jealous stories to ruin his reputation. You have always been clumsy and now you are just being vindictive. Before I could even attempt to defend myself, the top stairwell door burst open again. A rapid response medical team rushed in, led by a tall, imposing woman in dark blue scrubs. Her name tag read Time Sarah, head trauma nurse. She took one look at the scene and immediately went into professional mode. What exactly happened here? Sarah demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She completely ignored my parents and dropped to her knees beside me, gently stabilizing my neck. Our son had a clumsy accident, my father said smoothly, stepping directly in front of Liam to shield him from the nurse's view. He was running up the stairs, completely ignored the wet floor sign, and lost his footing. His older brother bravely tried to catch him, but missed. Nurse Sarah didn't look up at my father. Her experienced eyes darted to the angle of my fall, the massive distance between the landing and my body, the position of my limbs, and then slowly up to the top landing where Liam stood perfectly unharmed. She was a veteran of the emergency room. She knew exactly what a clumsy slip looked like, and she knew exactly what an intentional, forceful assault looked like. Step back, sir, Sarah ordered, her voice leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Do not crowd my patient. We need to stabilize his cervical spine immediately. As the EMTs expertly strapped me to a rigid backboard, a younger nurse hurried into the stairwell holding a glowing hospital tablet. She looked visibly panicked. Nurse Sarah, you need to see this immediately. Hospital security just flagged the feed from this sector. Not now, my mother snapped aggressively, waving her manicured hand dismissively. We are dealing with a private family matter. In fact, we will be taking Ethan to a private clinic in our network. I do not want him treated at this public facility. Have your people help him out to our car. Sarah completely ignored my mother. She took the tablet, her eyes scanning the screen for 10 seconds. I watched her jaw clench so hard a muscle ticked in her cheek. The air in the stairwell seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. She handed the tablet back and pulled out her shoulder radio. Security, this is Sarah. Initiate a full lockdown on stairwell C and secure the perimeter immediately. I need the raw camera footage from the last 15 minutes sent directly to the police liaison's office. She said calmly, her eyes never leaving my parents. My father's face went completely pale, all his previous arrogance draining away. What footage? I demand you release my son to us right now. I will have my lawyer sue you for unlawful detainment. Sarah stood up to her full height and looked my father dead in the eye. Sir, every single stairwell in this hospital is monitored 24/7 by high-definition cameras. What I just witnessed on that security feed is not a clumsy accident. It is felony assault. This is no longer a family matter, and absolutely nobody is leaving this building until law enforcement arrives. I saw Liam physically recoil against the wall. His perfect, smug facade began to violently crack, but the dark truth was, this brutal push was not an isolated incident. To understand how my own family could stand there, watch me bleed, and actively side with my attacker, you have to understand the deeply toxic foundation my entire life was built upon. Growing up, there were two entirely distinct realities in our household. There was Liam's world, a world of endless privilege and zero consequences. And then there was my world, a world of constant labor, invisible sacrifices, and perpetual blame. Liam was the undeniable golden child. When he turned 16, my parents dipped into their retirement to buy him a brand new Audi. 2 days later, he backed it into a brick mailbox. Instead of punishing him, my father handed me a bucket of soapy water and told me to buff out the scratches, blaming me for distracting Liam while he was driving. When I turned 16, I got a firm handshake and a job application for a local hardware store to build character. When it came time for college, I discovered my parents had completely drained the educational fund my grandparents had set up for me. They casually admitted they used the $95,000 to pay for Liam's lavish destination wedding in the Bahamas, a marriage that inevitably ended in a messy divorce just 8 months later. I was left to take out crippling student loans and work grueling night shifts just to survive. But there was one person who saw straight through their smoke and mirrors, Grandma Eleanor. Eleanor was my father's mother, a fiercely independent woman who built a highly lucrative real estate portfolio from scratch. She did not tolerate manipulation, and she absolutely despised Liam's entitlement. A year ago, Grandma Eleanor required high-risk open-heart surgery, needing round-the-clock intensive care for her 6-month recovery. My parents instantly bailed. My father claimed his executive job was too demanding, my mother claimed she had too many charity galas. Liam dramatically sighed, said hospitals depressed his creative energy, and booked a 3-week vacation to Cabo. So I stepped up. I broke my apartment lease and moved my entire life into Eleanor's historic mansion. For 6 months, I cooked her specific dietary meals, managed her complex medications, bathed her when she was too weak to stand, and worked my remote job late into the night. We bonded deeply. She watched me meticulously balance my meager salary to pay my loans while helping her manage her multi-million-dollar estate paperwork. 3 months ago, Liam came over unannounced. I was in the kitchen when I heard a violent crash from Eleanor's private home office. I ran in to find Liam standing aggressively over a forcibly opened filing cabinet, his face purple with rage, tightly gripping a thick legal document. It was a certified copy of Grandma Eleanor's updated will and living trust. "What the hell is this, Ethan?" Liam screamed, shoving me hard against a bookshelf. "She is leaving the historic property, the stock portfolio, the liquid assets, everything to you. You manipulated a sick old woman. That money belongs to me. It is my birthright." Suddenly, Grandma Eleanor appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on her wooden cane. "Put my private papers down and get out of my house this instant," she commanded, her voice shaking the walls. "Ethan didn't manipulate anything. I changed my will because he is the only person in this family with an ounce of integrity. If you ever lay a hand on your brother again, I will make sure you don't get a single dime from your father's estate either." Liam dropped the papers, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "This is not over, Ethan," he hissed. That was the exact moment my life became a daily terrifying hazard. Over the next few months, strange, dangerous accidents started happening whenever my family was around. At a family BBQ, Liam tripped and shoved me off a concrete patio into a thorny rosebush. At the grocery store, a heavy wooden pallet mysteriously toppled over exactly where I was standing. At the hospital 3 weeks ago, Liam's foot hooked my ankle near a water fountain, sending me smashing my chin into the porcelain, requiring 6 stitches. My parents always laughed it off, completely dismissing my claims and labeling me an uncoordinated liability. And then came today, the hospital stairwell. The moment he decided small accidents weren't enough to remove the obstacle to his wealth. Update 1. The emergency room was a chaotic, dizzying blur of harsh lights and frantic shouting. I was lying flat on a stiff gurney in Trauma Bay 3, my chest tightly wrapped in thick bandages. The X-rays had just confirmed the brutal reality: 3 severely broken ribs, a hairline fracture in my collarbone, and a shattered wrist. Through the thin blue privacy curtain, I could clearly hear the vicious argument in the hallway. My parents were absolutely furious. "This is completely outrageous." Yeah. My father yelled, slamming his heavy hand against a metal medical cart. "I am a respected corporate executive. We are not allowing our son to be locked in a room and interrogated like a common street thug. I demand you process the discharge papers for Ethan immediately. Your son pushed his brother down a concrete flight of stairs with enough force to break bones," Nurse Sarah replied, her voice dangerously calm and unyielding. "The local police department has already been dispatched. We are treating this as a crime scene." The privacy curtain was yanked back abruptly. Dr. Eris, the senior attending trauma surgeon, stepped firmly into my bay, followed closely by Nurse Sarah. They ignored the screaming match outside. "Ethan," Dr. Eris said, his expression incredibly grim, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you in fear for your life outside of this building?" I stared down at my heavily bruised hands, the suffocating weight of my family's ultimate betrayal pressing down on my broken chest. "I live with my grandmother right now," I murmured, my voice shaking. Nurse Sarah stepped forward, holding her glowing tablet. "While you were down in radiology, our risk management team pulled your medical history. We noticed a very distinct, highly disturbing pattern. We went back and reviewed the archived security footage from your previous visits to this hospital with your grandmother." My heart began to hammer violently against my broken ribs. 3 weeks ago, you required 6 stitches by the water fountain. 2 months before that, a severely sprained ankle in the parking garage. Last month, a mild concussion near the cafeteria. We pulled the high-definition archival tape for every single one of those incidents. The silence in the trauma bay was deafening. "What did you see?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "We saw your brother," Dr. Eris said firmly, his voice filled with righteous anger. "We saw him intentionally stick his foot out at the fountain. We saw him aggressively shove you from behind in the parking garage. We have exactly 6 documented, crystal clear recorded accidents on hospital property. In every single one, Liam is the aggressor, and your parents are standing right there watching it happen in real time, actively looking the other way." The remaining breath completely left my lungs. I knew they enabled Liam, but to hear a medical professional confirm they actively watched him systematically abuse me and covered it up, it broke something fundamental deep inside my soul. I was nothing but acceptable collateral damage in their desperate mission to protect their golden child. The curtain flew open with violent force. My father stormed in, his face bright red, Liam cowering cowardly behind his broad shoulders. "We are leaving right now," my father barked, pointing an aggressive finger at Dr. Aris. "I am calling my lawyer. You are facing a massive medical malpractice lawsuit. You are not in charge here, sir," Dr. Aris stated, towering over my father with quiet authority. "Ethan is an adult. As mandated reporters, this violent cycle of abuse stops today." My mother aggressively pushed past my father, rushing to my bedside. She grabbed my uninjured left hand, digging her manicured nails painfully into my skin. Her eyes were wide and pleading, but a vicious threat lingered right beneath her sweet tone. "Ethan, please listen to me," she whispered frantically. "Tell them it was a huge mistake. Tell them you tripped on your shoelaces. If they arrest Liam, it will ruin his life. He'll lose everything. You know he just gets a little hot-headed. Please, for the sake of our family, be the bigger person." I looked deep into the eyes of the woman who birthed me, actively begging me to swallow my trauma and ignore my shattered bones just to keep her favorite son out of a jail cell. For 25 years, I had absorbed the pain to keep their twisted version of peace. A fire ignited deep in my chest, burning away decades of fear and submission. I yanked my hand violently out of her grasp. "No," I said, my voice ringing out clear and unwavering. My mother gasped loudly, stepping back as if I had physically struck her. "Ethan, what are you doing?" "I am completely done," I said, looking directly into my father's shocked eyes. "I am done being your designated punching bag." He didn't slip. He actively tried to kill me so he could steal Grandma's inheritance. I turned to Nurse Sarah. "Call the police. Give them everything you have. I want to press full criminal charges." "You little ungrateful bastard," Liam snarled, losing his victim facade instantly. He lunged forward with his fists raised, but before he could take 2 steps, Dr. Aris shoved him incredibly hard against the metal doorframe. A heavy-set hospital security guard stepped into the room, placing his hand threateningly on his utility belt, forcing Liam back into the hallway. 10 minutes later, Detective Hayes confidently walked into Trauma Bay 3. She was a seasoned, tough-as-nails investigator. After clearing my toxic family into an isolated holding area, she sat beside my bed. I told her absolutely everything: the push, the cruel words, the fake phone call, the inheritance dispute, and the escalating dangerous accidents. Hayes took meticulous notes but looked at me with a neutral expression. "Inheritance disputes are common motives," she noted quietly. "But I have to be honest, Ethan. Proving criminal intent in a fall is notoriously difficult. A good defense attorney will argue it was a sibling scuffle. Getting a DA to bite on premeditated attempted murder is a massive legal leap." As if on exact cue, a sharp-dressed man wearing a custom Italian suit strode aggressively into my bay. It was Sterling, a notoriously ruthless corporate defense lawyer my father kept on permanent retainer. "Detective Hayes," Sterling said smoothly, oozing fake charm, "I formally represent Liam and his parents. We are demanding Liam be released immediately. There is zero credible physical evidence of a crime here. Only the rambling accusations of an unhinged sibling with a highly documented history of severe mental instability." I felt my heart drop like a stone. Mental instability. Sterling turned his predatory gaze directly to me. "My client's brother has been under immense, crushing stress acting as a full-time caregiver for an elderly dementia patient. We are fully prepared to bring in highly paid medical experts to testify he is suffering from severe paranoia, delusions, and caregiver burnout." He lunged aggressively at my client in a manic state on that stairwell, lost his footing, and fell. Liam heroically tried to catch him, but failed. "This is a tragic accident, not a crime." Hayes crossed her arms. "We have high-definition security footage of the explicit push, Mr. Sterling." Sterling smiled, a cold reptilian stretch of the lips. "Video without audio is entirely subjective, Detective. It will simply show a chaotic struggle. If you arrest my client on this incredibly flimsy evidence, I will personally file a massive multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against this hospital, your precinct, and this young man." The room grew incredibly tense. My parents had brought in the absolute heaviest artillery to crush me into silence. Just as Hayes was about to sharply respond, a young man wearing a hospital IT uniform jogged urgently into the room. It was Noah, the lead security technician. He looked out of breath, gripping a small silver USB drive triumphantly. "Excuse me, Detective," Noah interrupted, completely ignoring the glaring million-dollar lawyer. "Nurse Sarah asked me to pull the raw data files from the stairwell C camera. It was a code red priority." "We already have the video file, son," Hayes said gently. "Yes, ma'am, I know," Noah replied rapidly, plugging the USB drive into Sarah's tablet on the desk. "But you see, stairwell C is an old emergency exit. Last month, administration upgraded the entire security system to include high-definition environmental audio recording to strictly monitor for fire alarms. I just spent the last 20 minutes running the raw file through our audio extraction software to isolate the voices from the background echo. Lawyer Sterling's arrogant smile instantly vanished. He took a quick step forward. I object to this entirely. This is an illegal wiretap in a private facility. A public hospital stairwell has absolutely zero reasonable expectation of privacy, Counselor. Hayes snapped back fiercely. Play the audio, Noah. Now. Noah tapped the screen. The tiny electronic hiss of the concrete stairwell filled the silent trauma bay. And then, clear as absolute day, Liam's voice echoed loudly from the small speakers. But it wasn't the conversation we had right before the push. It was a phone call he had made exactly 10 minutes prior, pacing the top landing alone while waiting for me to walk up the stairs. I don't care what Dad says, Liam's recorded voice snarled aggressively, dripping with venom. I am not letting that little rat take the house. It's prime historic real estate. If the old bat dies and he gets control of the trust, I am totally screwed. No, listen to me. One more accident should do it permanently. I'm going to push him down the concrete flight in stairwell C. It's a completely blind corner. I'll just say, he tripped, and I tried to catch him. With his injuries, he will either give up the claim out of fear or be too brain damaged to fight me in probate court. I'm taking care of the obstacle right now. Just have the lawyer ready. The audio clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and profound. The air was completely sucked out of the room. Lawyer Sterling stared blankly at the tablet, his face completely drained of all color, looking like he had just seen a ghost. He slowly reached down and closed the golden clasps of his expensive leather briefcase with a quiet click. He was a shark, and he knew exactly what a sinking ship looked like. Detective Hayes stood up slowly, a grim victorious smile playing on her lips. Subjective video, Mr. Sterling, severe paranoia? Your client just explicitly confessed to premeditated attempted murder on a crystal-clear audio tape. He established a financial motive, the physical method, and the lethal intent. Sterling didn't say a single word. He didn't try to argue. He just nodded tightly, turned around on his expensive heels, and walked straight out of the trauma bay, completely abandoning my family to their inevitable fate. Hayes unclipped the heavy steel handcuffs from her duty belt. They clinked together with a sound that felt like absolute freedom. Hang tight, Ethan. The storm is about to hit the hallway. Update 2. I thought the audio recording was the ultimate weapon that would end this nightmare. I was incredibly wrong. The real bomb was about to be dropped, and it was coming from the one person my parents feared more than anyone else in the world. My parents were still sequestered in the windowless holding area near the cafeteria, blissfully oblivious to the catastrophic reality that Liam had just explicitly confessed to attempted murder on tape. They truly thought Arthur Sterling was currently bullying the detective into dropping the charges. They had absolutely no idea that a real, unyielding reckoning was rolling down the corridor. I heard the steady, rhythmic squeak of a heavy-duty hospital wheelchair cutting sharply through the sterile silence. Nurse Sarah pulled back the heavy blue privacy curtain just as the wheelchair rounded the corner. Sitting there, dressed in a standard-issue faded hospital gown but looking like an absolute untouchable queen commanding a throne, was Grandma Eleanor. Despite her recent open-heart surgery, her spine was straight as an iron rod. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her sharp blue eyes blazed with a cold, meticulously calculated fury. She was flanked on her left by Dr. Aris and on her right by a tall, incredibly imposing man in a tailored charcoal suit, clutching a massive thick black leather binder. Ethan, Grandma Eleanor said, her voice slightly raspy but carrying an undeniable heavy weight. She looked at my heavily bandaged chest and shattered arm. A brief, incredibly painful flicker of profound sorrow crossed her eyes, instantly replaced by absolute terrifying resolve. I specifically told you I would protect you. I am so profoundly sorry it came to this brutal escalation. Before I could respond, the heavy double doors burst open. My parents, having arrogantly convinced a young security guard they had a right to exit the holding area, marched aggressively down the corridor toward my bay. Liam was hiding in their shadow, still wearing that untouchable smirk, completely oblivious to the legal nuclear bomb that had just dropped. Ethan, this ridiculous farce has gone on long enough. My father boomed, his expensive shoes clicking aggressively. He didn't even notice Grandma Eleanor yet. We just tried calling Sterling's cell and his secretary said he had an emergency. Whatever lies you told him, it doesn't matter. We are leaving, and you are going to call the DA tomorrow and retract your statement, or I will see to it that you never get a decent job in this city again. Are you quite finished humiliating yourself, Richard? The voice cracked through the chaotic hallway like a physical leather whip. My father froze mid-step, his arrogant posture instantly deflating. He slowly turned his head, his eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror as he finally saw his mother sitting in the wheelchair, blocking the entrance to my bay like an impenetrable fortress. Mother, my father stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. What are you doing down here? Your heart condition. My heart is perfectly functionally fine, Richard. It is my soul that is sick to its stomach looking at you right now, Grandma Eleanor stated, her voice echoing powerfully. The entire emergency room became a captive audience to the spectacular destruction of my family's toxic empire. My mother desperately plastered on a fake, incredibly strained smile. Eleanor, please, darling. Ethan just had a very clumsy, unfortunate fall on the stairs. Liam bravely tried to catch him. It is just a private family matter. We are handling it. Grandma Eleanor looked at my mother with such intense, unfiltered disgust that my mother physically flinched. A private family matter, Eleanor repeated dangerously. You stand there covered in expensive diamond jewelry paid for entirely by my late husband's company, and you explicitly lie directly to my face? You think I don't know exactly what you three disgusting parasites have been doing behind my back? Liam scoffed loudly, crossing his arms. Grandma, calm down. Ethan is just playing the pathetic victim again to manipulate you into giving him more money. He is completely crazy. Grandma Eleanor didn't yell at Liam, she simply raised her frail hand and snapped her fingers loudly. The tall man in the charcoal suit immediately stepped forward and opened his massive black leather binder. Richard, Susan, Liam, Eleanor said, her tone shifting to that of a ruthless corporate executive conducting a hostile takeover. I would like to formally introduce you to Mr. Caldwell. He is a senior forensic accountant and a former federal prosecutor. I quietly hired his private investigative firm exactly 10 months ago. The remaining color completely vanished from my parents' faces. They looked like they were staring directly at a firing squad. 10 months ago? My father whispered, trembling violently. Yes, Richard, Eleanor confirmed coldly. Right around the time I noticed Ethan constantly showing up to my house to cook my meals while sporting unexplained bruises and a perpetual look of absolute terror in his eyes. Right around the time Liam suddenly started taking first-class luxury vacations while claiming he was completely broke. I am not blind, Richard. I had no idea the terrifying depths of your absolute moral bankruptcy until Mr. Caldwell brought me his weekly reports. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his glasses and began to read directly from the binder in a loud, authoritative voice. Over the past 10 continuous months, our firm has fully documented 3 separate instances of Liam intentionally destroying Ethan's personal property. Furthermore, we have successfully subpoenaed restricted bank records proving that Richard and Susan actively drained a federally protected college fund set up by Eleanor for Ethan to fund Liam's lavish destination wedding. Finally, we have obtained private timestamp security footage from the grocery store, the country club, and this very hospital's parking garage. This footage explicitly shows Liam intentionally causing severe physical harm to Ethan on 4 separate occasions, with both Richard and Susan physically present, actively concealing the crimes. My mother's legs gave out entirely. She let out a pathetic gasp and literally collapsed heavily against the cold hallway wall, sliding down to the linoleum floor, clutching her chest. Mother, please, I am begging you. My father pleaded, genuine tears welling in his eyes, not out of guilt for what he had done to me, but out of sheer terror for his bank accounts. We were just trying to protect Liam. A police investigation would ruin his life. You can't do this to your own blood. You made your ultimate choice about family and blood when you stood there and watched Ethan bleed on that concrete, and then aggressively told him to shut his mouth to protect a violent criminal. Eleanor fired back, shaking with righteous rage. You thought you could just wait patiently for me to die, bully Ethan into giving up his inheritance, and walk away with my real estate empire. She turned to Mr. Caldwell. Give them the final documents. Mr. Caldwell pulled out 3 thick manila envelopes and methodically handed one to my father, one to my weeping mother, and one to a paralyzed Liam. What is this? Liam demanded, his hand shaking as he ripped open the envelope, pulling out a massive stack of heavily notarized legal papers. That, Grandma Eleanor said, a cold, incredibly satisfying smile spreading across her face, is your brand new permanent reality. As of 9 this morning, my team of attorneys officially finalized the paperwork. My entire estate, all the historic properties, the massive stock portfolio, the corporate holding company, and every last dime I possess have been permanently and legally transferred into an irrevocable trust. The sole exclusive beneficiary and executive of that trust is Ethan. My father physically dropped the heavy envelope. The papers scattered chaotically across the floor. An irrevocable trust meant it could absolutely never be changed, never be contested, and never be touched by a probate court. The money was completely locked away behind an impenetrable legal wall. Furthermore, I have officially legally severed all financial and corporate ties with you, Richard, Eleanor continued with devastating finality. The beautiful suburban mansion you currently live in is entirely owned by my holding company. I just signed the eviction notice. You have exactly 30 days to completely vacate the premises. Your exorbitant monthly allowance is permanently terminated. Your corporate credit cards are cancelled. Your position on my board of directors is dissolved. You are completely, utterly, and legally cut off. Liam stared blankly at the dense legal documents. The devastating realization that he was suddenly entirely penniless, utterly homeless, and facing severe felony charges hit his privileged brain like a runaway freight train. "You can't do this to me," Liam screamed, crumpling the papers and lunging aggressively toward Grandma's wheelchair. "That money is mine. I am the firstborn grandson. I will sue you for everything you have." Before he could close half the distance, Detective Hayes stepped smoothly out from the shadows, flanked tightly by two massive, fully uniformed police officers. "Liam," Detective Hayes said, her voice cutting sharply through his hysterical tantrum. "Turn around immediately and place your hands firmly behind your back." Liam froze entirely in his tracks. He looked frantically at the heavily armed officers, then whipped his head around to look at my parents. "Mom, Dad, do something. Call Sterling. Tell them it's a huge mistake. I didn't do anything wrong." "Arthur Sterling formally and legally withdrew as your legal counsel exactly 15 minutes ago," Hayes stated bluntly, forcefully spinning Liam around. "He heard the high-definition audio recording of you actively planning to brutally murder your brother on the stairwell. He doesn't represent massive liabilities who confess on tape." "Audio recording?" my mother whispered, sounding completely hollow. "What audio recording?" Detective Hayes looked right through my mother with chilling disdain. "Stairwell C has high-definition audio recording. We have your precious son on tape exactly 10 minutes before the violent assault detailing his explicit plan to push Ethan down the concrete stairs in order to severely injure him and force him to forfeit his inheritance. It is a textbook airtight confession to premeditated attempted murder." My father stumbled backward as if he had been physically punched in the gut. He looked at Liam, who was now weeping hysterically, large ugly tears streaming down his face as the officers aggressively kicked his legs apart. The absolute golden child, the untouchable prince of the family, was sobbing uncontrollably like a broken, terrified child. "Mom, please. Dad." Liam wailed loudly, struggling pathetically as the cold steel handcuffs clicked violently around his wrists. "I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't mean it. I just wanted to scare him. You have to help me." My mother scrambled to her feet and took a frantic step toward him, but my father abruptly grabbed her arm, yanking her back so violently she almost fell over. Survival instinct, raw and incredibly selfish, had finally kicked in. Richard realized that associating with Liam meant going down with the sinking ship. "Richard, let me go, they are taking our boy." My mother cried. "Shut your mouth, Susan." My father hissed vehemently, his voice trembling with a coward's absolute panic. "Do you not understand what is happening? He is on a police tape explicitly planning a murder. If we say a single word to defend him, they will charge us as active accessories. We have to distance ourselves from him right this second to save ourselves." I watched this horrific display from my hospital bed. The very second the protective bubble of immense money popped, they turned on each other like starving rabid wolves. My father was perfectly willing to throw his beloved son directly to the wolves to save his own skin. As the officers dragged Liam down the long hallway, he stopped struggling for a fraction of a second and locked his terrified eyes directly with mine. In his wide, panicked eyes, I saw nothing but raw, unadulterated terror. He opened his mouth to say something, but I simply didn't care to hear it. I slowly reached up with my good hand, grabbed the edge of the blue privacy curtain, and pulled it completely shut with a sharp swish, cutting him off from my view forever. 6 months later, the legal and financial fallout was utterly brutal and entirely merciless. Liam, entirely stripped of his protective golden armor and facing a ruthless district attorney armed with a crystal-clear audio confession, completely crumbled. Without my father's deep pockets to hire a shark, Liam was assigned an overworked public defender who bluntly told him to beg for a plea deal. Liam pleaded guilty to felony aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, the concrete stairs, and premeditated intent to cause grievous bodily harm. He was sentenced to a mandatory minimum of 5 solid years in a maximum security state penitentiary, followed by 5 years of strict probation. I didn't bother going to his sentencing hearing. As for my parents, Grandma Eleanor absolutely did not bluff. She aggressively evicted them from the beautiful, sprawling 5-bedroom suburban mansion they had lived in for 20 years. With his massive monthly allowance permanently severed and his highly lucrative position terminated, my father found himself shockingly unemployable in his sector. His reputation in our city's tight-knit corporate community was completely radioactive after the elder abuse allegations heavily leaked to the local press. To avoid absolute catastrophic bankruptcy, my parents were forced to drastically downsize. They frantically sold their luxury cars, auctioned off my mother's diamond jewelry, and moved into a cramped, highly depressing 2-bedroom apartment on the loud side of the city. I completely ignored every single one of their desperate emails begging for reconciliation. I was physically healed, living comfortably in Grandma Eleanor's historic home, and learning to manage the massive real estate holding company under Mr. Caldwell's guidance. I had successfully convinced Eleanor to allocate a massive portion of the liquid assets to fully fund a scholarship and housing program for young adults who were confirmed victims of domestic and financial abuse. I was turning my darkest trauma into a weapon of mass creation. But yesterday, A final twist arrived in the mail. It was a slightly crumpled white envelope, heavily stamped with official red ink from the maximum security state correctional facility. It was from Liam. I opened it carefully. The letter read, "Ethan, I'm not writing this to ask for your forgiveness. Being locked in an 8x10 concrete cell for 23 hours a day breaks you down. I am writing this strictly because I owe you the absolute truth about how things escalated so violently. Yes, I was furious about the inheritance. But, I wasn't the only one whispering in your ear. And I wasn't the only one who wanted you gone. For 6 entire months before the incident on the stairs, our cousin Caleb was calling my cell phone almost every single day. He works at the downtown law firm as a paralegal and he illegally peeked at Grandma's highly confidential files. He was the one who kept aggressively telling me that you were planning to kick Mom and Dad out on the street the second Grandma died to punish us all. He kept saying, if Ethan just wasn't around, you'd get the entire estate, and then I could help you manage the portfolio to make us both rich. He wound me up like a cheap, stupid toy and pointed me directly at you. He desperately wanted us to violently destroy each other so he could easily swoop in as the supportive nephew and manipulate Grandma into giving him control of the trust. I pulled the trigger on that stairwell, and I ruined my own life, but you need to watch your back. Caleb is an absolute snake in the grass, and he is still out there playing the good guy, waiting for an opening. Stay safe, Liam. Cousin Caleb. The quiet, seemingly supportive, entirely forgettable cousin who had immediately texted me when I was lying in the hospital bed offering his deepest condolences. He had been the completely invisible, malicious puppet master the entire time, constantly stoking Liam's profound narcissism and endless greed, hoping to orchestrate a fatal collision so he could quietly collect the highly lucrative debris. A year ago, this revelation would have sent me into a blind, terrifying panic. I would have felt completely overwhelmed by the inescapable toxicity of my extended bloodline. But sitting inside a historic house I legally owned, backed by an ironclad legal trust and a team of ruthless, incredibly expensive lawyers, I didn't feel a single ounce of fear. I just felt a profound, overwhelming pity for every single one of them. They were all playing a vicious, miserable, zero-sum game of chess, entirely destroying their own pathetic lives for money they didn't even earn. I didn't want to play their stupid game anymore. Without a single word of hesitation, I walked over to the grand stone fireplace, where a small fire was crackling pleasantly, and tossed Liam's letter directly into the hottest part of the orange flames. Let Caleb live with his pathetic failed schemes. Let him wonder why he never got a dime. If he ever tries to come anywhere near us, Mr. Caldwell can absolutely deal with him. I am not going to spend another single second of my beautiful life endlessly chasing the toxic ghosts of a family that never truly loved me. Sometimes hitting absolute rock bottom on a cold, unforgiving concrete landing is the only possible way to realize you finally have a solid foundation to stand up on. You cannot ever heal in the exact same toxic environment that originally made you sick. I am Ethan. I am 25 years old, I successfully survived my family, and for the very first time in my entire life, I am exactly where I belong.